Going. All right. Okay. We got to start with our first clap.
I'm
You ready for this? 1, 2, 3. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of True Crime and Cocktails. We're so glad that you're here. As always, I am your host, Lauren Ash, and as always, I am joined by my co-hostess with the most S, Christy Oxborrow. How you doing?
I believe just before we hit record, I quoted Monica from Friends and just said, "I'm breezy."
You did, and I believed you about as much as I believed her.
This was down to the wire. I mean, I told you 8 p.m. and then at 7:30 I went, how about 9? And you were like, yeah, for sure. And then I finished and I was like, oh, I had about 25 minutes. And so then it was, well, now I got to make school lunches for tomorrow. I got to run down and feed the cats. I got to go down and deal with their litter. And I'm like, by the time I'm done, I'm like, I barely made it to this seat before I had a Zoom invite. So just 2 women getting by.
Yeah, we're doing the best we can, dear listeners. It's what we always do. I was tested last week. I thought I went on my whole rant about that, and it's just gotten so much worse. No, it's fine. You gotta laugh, everybody. You gotta laugh. But I do want to share a very quick story. Death adjacent. I traveled for one of my closest friends' funerals this past weekend, which was gutting, awful, and all of the above. But the comedy comes in, the death adjacent comedy, which is what maybe we should call this show, death adjacent comedy. Because Leslie Seiler, friend of the podcast, she traveled with me for the funeral, as she is wont to do. And we were checking into our hotel. And here's the thing. I was stealing myself because when you're in a city, people like to ask you, what brings you to town? Right. And this gentleman, he was lovely. And he had been asking, other questions. We were having a hoot. And then he asked us what brought us to town. And I think it's because of I was prepared for it. Much like Chandler, I make jokes when I get nervous. I laugh when I laugh when I get nervous. And so I laughed and I said, for a funeral, because, that's life. And again, I find that you gotta laugh where you can. And I don't think he thought I was serious. I think he thought I was doing a bit because his responses didn't seem appropriate. Started with the quote, I got to tell you, some of the best moments of my life have been at funerals.
Oh, no.
Yep. He's like, the biggest laughs I've ever had have been at funerals. Then he went into a very long story about a funny funeral story. I'm not going to repeat it. He thought it was funny. Then he went into a very long story about his own wants for his own funeral. But then, and this is the, again, death adjacent comedy. I feel like most people, if you say, I'm here for a funeral, they say, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. Here are your room keys. At this point, I've been given 10 minutes of a tight stand-up act I didn't ask for nor want. It was also 11 p.m. I was starving. We just wanted to get into that room, get into robes, and get some room service. You know what I mean?
Of course.
But at this point, after, again, 10 minutes of yucks, this dear bellman, concierge, I don't know what the term is anymore. I'm not trying to not be PC. He says, but it was an old person, right? Who lived a good life. I just said, no, she was very young. I was like, who asks that? I mean, who doubles down on, oh, but it's an okay funeral, right? It's not a super sad one, right?
That's, oh boy.
Yeah.
Wow. Like, I think I get the concept of what brings you to town. I get it. The second funeral comes up, shut it down. Like, no, there's
Yeah.
absolutely nowhere you can go with that.
Yeah.
But
And after you've made a bunch of funeral jokes, told anecdotes, talked about what it meant to you, certainly don't go back to the deceased. Don't go back there for more. That was when and I know that I should have just said, we're just here for pleasure, but it was that I wanted it to end because it was late and we were tired and hungry. And so I laughed and because it was the truth. We're here for a funeral. I never in my wildest dreams expected that would be the outcome, you know?
did you have to see him again throughout your stay?
Of course.
Oh, that's
This is
unfortunate.
me you're talking to. This
I
is
know.
us.
I
Of
know.
course.
I just hoped he had the weekend off or something.
No,
and that
no.
was his final shift.
No, I gave him a nod, but I did not maintain eye contact long enough to see if he was going to beckon me over to hear about how good the refreshments were or if there was any good jokes.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Bad move. That was a bad move.
It was questionable. I'll say that much. It was bold.
Yes.
I'll say that. I think again, against the grain.
Yeah.
Yeah. And judging by his reaction too, because I know some people might think, oh, is it possible this person was and I can say this as somebody who is neurodivergent, is this somebody who potentially was neurodivergent or whatever on the spectrum? And there's no way to know. Obviously, masking is a thing, etc. But I will say that the level of horror on this man's face when I responded, no, she was very young, did make it seem like, no, he had just been digging a hole trying to make up for it. And then realized that at this point, just give the ladies the room keys and please let them out of your death grasp. Please.
Yeah.
Please, sir. Please.
Yeah. I also feel like after a certain hour, just give people their key.
Don't need it.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you kindly.
Unless he was really bored, unless he was slightly flirting,
we had masks on. I mean, not to say that I'm not hot in a mask, because listen, these eyes don't lie. But yeah, maybe. It was also like we also didn't get key pieces of information, like where are the elevators? But that could have been a symptom again of just trying to cover up for the awkwardness. But you know what I'll say is this. This is the last thing, because I know we've got a big case today, so we're going to get into it quick. But it is amazing to me how uncomfortable people are talking about death, which is interesting, and grief, which is interesting because we are in a society that currently loves true crime. So it's interesting to me that for a society that is so interested, you could argue, in unfortunate death, that there is also such a discomfort in talking about grief, death, holding space, all of those kinds of things. It's been fascinating for me because, again, I had mentioned it on an earlier episode of the show. I lost someone who was very special to me, very close to me. And so it's been something that I've been pragmatic about in some conversations because it is what it is. She, of course, did pass very sadly from breast cancer. So it is what it is. We knew it was going to happen. And it did happen. You know what I mean? And there's also, there's part of me that's like, I don't feel like I should have to kind of tap dance and sugarcoat and whatever, because at the very end of this interchange with this gentleman, he was like, but do you think she would have been okay with us joking? And it was like, well, yeah, no one would be laughing harder at this than her. And I'm sure she was somewhere watching going like, this is ridiculous. but it was like everything is just about alleviating, I think that I think that that's my wish for the world, is just two things. One, you don't have to know what to say. You just have to say, it's so sorry to hear it. And that's it. It doesn't have to be fun. It doesn't have to be a laugh. It can just be, and just because somebody is pragmatic or laughing at the awkwardness doesn't mean that they want to get into a death adjacent comedy conversation, you know? And then the other thing I'll just say is that life is short, everybody. And to all of those people who've taken the time out of their days to write shitty comments to us about how we talk too long at the beginning of the episodes, get to the case. You know what I'm going to say? I'm going to say a saying that our grandmother used to say, and that is, I invite you to ride the toe of my boot. And I'm going to tell you why. Because we have fun on this show, and life is too short not to.
The best part is that I knew where you were going the second you mentioned grandma. Yeah. I get that people are like, just give us true crime.
Sure.
But also it's not our style to just be like, welcome. So today, and then just get in. It's like, we gotta,
what we do.
We gotta, you dip a toe, you ease in, you check in. And
what
then
we've always said in the past is that, you know, if you don't like the banter, that's fine. Skip ahead 20 minutes. Then we're into the case. But I think what's interesting is that people are just getting more aggressive about it. And to that, I say, why do you keep coming back?
Yeah.
Because when you watch parents bury their child, you get a real perspective that life is too short to sit on the internet talking about whether or not two women that love each other to the ends of the earth, having a laugh, sharing their joy with the world is something that you need to talk about negatively, you know? I stand by this.
Oh, absolutely. Because I mean, and also it's a nice balance to the our episodes. The cases are usually like not pleasant. They're not, yuck stand-up worthy there.
Yeah.
But this one in particular is so brutal that it's nice to start on a high note. And then you dip it down for a bit, and then we'll bring it back up later. Maybe if I get through this, we'll see. But the point is, it is possible, and maybe people just aren't aware. It is possible to not like something and not say anything about it.
It is. And it's also possible that if you communicate it on a public forum, you don't have to then go to private avenues and keep messaging two women who are just getting by until you get a response, because they're also doing things like going to the funeral of their 45-year-old close friend who just died. So on that note, is this better? We're 12 minutes in and we'll get into the case, and we haven't really had many laughs. Does this make you happy?
Does this entertain you? Yeah, I get that. I get it.
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit, but it's just, it was, it's just one of those things. Again, there's moments in life where you get real perspective and you go, nobody gonna break my stride. What you drinking over there?
Obviously a water, hydrate always.
Please.
And then I went for a Mike's hard lime because
that's nice.
I went to reach for a Coke because I desperately need the caffeine.
Mm.
And then I grabbed the wrong can and was about to open it, realized my error and went, nah, and just decided to run with it anyway.
I like it. And I've got something over here I'm calling a triple canner. A triple canner. It starts with a sparkling pamplemousse LaCroix, hydrate.
Of course.
Then it's a can of Diet Coke, which I wasn't going to put alcohol in. And then I think everyone knows from my Jagged Energy, I just slopped Jack Daniels right into the can.
Yep.
You know what I mean? I was just like, that's where you're at. And then the third can is this can of cheddar and sour cream Pringles.
Amazing.
Yeah, life's too short.
I was so excited to find out what that third can was. Could not have been more excited that it was a food.
I just wanted to get a laugh out of you. Again, I went dark there at the beginning, and I'm not saying I regret it. I don't, but I still want to get a laugh out of you at least. Why else are we here? Why else are we here? And I know people are going to say, don't listen, don't read it, etc. And I understand that that is a concept that makes sense, but we do that already. And what I'm addressing is the people that don't stop, that they go to every method of contacting you to tell you that they think that you're a piece of shit. And what I'm saying is that find something better to do with your days.
Yeah.
I don't know. Psychologist hat on. What happened to you? What happened to you? Because I have compassion for you, even though you don't have compassion for us. On that note, this has been a very special True Crime and Cocktails. Lauren Ash yells. I stand by it. I stand by it.
I can't wait. Look, you haven't misspoke yet.
Right?
Yeah.
Huh. Pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty good. We're talking, this is, of course, our patrons poll pick episode for the month of October.
Was it? Probably.
So hard to know. So hard to know.
I also love. I think you're right.
I think it is. So on Patreon, patreon.com/True Crime and Cocktails, we have a subscription service where you can get bonus episodes, monthly live Q&As that are 3 hours long because we love them. And you can vote in a poll, and it picks one of the regular podcast episodes on this feed per month. And this was what was voted on in the month of October. I should also just add, if this is the first time someone's listening to the show, what a wild one to come in on.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're now so far in.
Yeah.
That we can't be like, oh, by the way, if you're new to the show, maybe pick another. But you know, it is
back to the Glee curse. It's a romp.
Oh, the Glee curse. The Glee curse just went a lot of places I wasn't expecting it to go. And
well, literally, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. Well, because you only live once. So just go for it.
Hey, come on. Again, you only live once. Life is short. We're lucky to age. All of the, I'm just talking in like inspirational page a day calendar quotes now. And I stand by it. I stand by it.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're going to get into it. Sophie, A Murder in West Cork is the episode we're going to be talking about. Now, that, of course, is the name of the Netflix documentary about this case, correct?
Correct.
Okay, great. So that's, obviously we're going to hear all about Sophie, who, of course, is our victim in this case, and the whole schmozzle, but that's what we're calling because there was a Netflix documentary made and it's very popular.
Yes.
So that could have brought you to this episode. It made you immediately turn away when I was yelling at all of you, but it's not at all of you. It's a very small amount, which I do believe are still listening is the other thing. That's the other joke.
If any of the people are listening to this have experienced the internet in any way, they'll get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
They'll get it.
I think it's, you know what it is that I had such a challenging few months. And then I was in such a good place. And then it crashed down again, which is tough. And I think it was just, the timing of some very mean comments that you can try and avoid and they'll find their way to you. And I just, today was the day. Today was the day. No more. Tove my boot. Ride it. Ride it.
I could not be happier that might be our new show mantra.
I can't wait for the merch requests, and I can't wait to try and design the proper boot because it's going to have a very pointy toe.
That feels right.
It does. It does. Anyway, we're so glad you're here, though. All jokes aside, listen, I had a very challenging weekend. I'm still frazzled, and we're glad you're here. Hug the ones you love. And that's not me being facetious. Seriously, it's life is short. It's a beautiful thing. And we're glad that you're here. The people that get joy out of this show, the people that like the banter. Thank you. Thank you for the support. It means a lot to us. We appreciate you. And your voices do outnumber the negatives, but it's just, sometimes the negatives make you want to scream from the mountains or walk into the ocean.
Yeah. Yeah. And to the people who don't like the banter and skip ahead quietly and never say anything about it, atta go.
Bless you. Bless yous. Bless yous.
Yeah.
You're welcome here too. No qualms.
Yeah.
No qualms.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Mm.
So we take you now, of course, to our patrons poll pick for the month of October, Sophie, a murder in West Cork. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, because if you're not familiar, we'll catch you up to speed like we always do. Again, if you're a first timer, this is what we do. We're getting back into the rhythm. It's not all yell, yell, anger, sadness. We're good. French television producer Sophie Toscan du Plantier was spending time alone in her holiday home in Ireland when she was found brutally murdered in December 1996. Early on, investigators zeroed in on a local journalist named Ian Bailey, who has since been arrested 3 separate times for the crime. Despite a French trial convicting Bailey of Sophie's murder, an Irish court has found him not guilty. So was Ian Ziering. It's Ian.
Yeah, I know.
Yep. So sorry. So was Ian Bailey truly involved in Sophie's murder? Or was the police investigation so biased against him that investigators ignored evidence pointing to another killer? But if Ian Bailey is innocent, then why is he confessed? Christy Oxborrow investigates. I wrote that part. She didn't write that part.
Of course. Well, first, I'm just going to say 2 things. One, I love that you see Ian and your brain goes 90210.
It did immediately. It really did.
And I think he would be honored to know that you see it and you think of him, the one person on the planet who pronounces it. Ian, right?
Yeah.
Ian Ziering. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, Ziering, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And 2, in my frazzled state coming into the room to quickly get in to make sure I was here to click the button to get ready, I knocked water over on my notes. So they are what they are. Because
they look like I feel. I get it.
We're just 2 women
Getting by.
That's who we are. So, as a disclaimer, I just wanted to say that there is a ton of info out there about this case, and unfortunately, a lot of it is conflicting. So I have done my best to be as accurate as possible, and while there is a lot about the case itself, there is not a lot known about Sophie prior to her death, so I've pieced together what I could find. And to all of our French-speaking listeners, I apologize in advance for my pronunciations. We're just 2 women getting by.
Say getting by. I did it in a French accent, and I don't know why.
Because we need something to take the focus off of all of the names I'm going to have to say.
Yeah.
Again,
Je suis désolé.
My kids know more French than I do. It's embarrassing. Like, I will never forget. I'm now pissing off the people who are like, I thought we were at the case.
Yeah, I know. We're already over 20 minutes, and I promised that we get in at 12.
I know. Well, they can be mad at me for this one. My children do French immersion, and my middle one, I want to say he was like the 1st or 2nd grade, maybe even kindergarten, and we were going through colors. And I was like, oh, here's this one. It's black. And so I was like, oh, noir. And he went, Mom, it's noir. And the way he said it, which I'm sure he said it exactly how he was taught, but was so perfect coming from such a small face that I was like, oh, okay, Fraser Crane, good to know. I'm like, I never feel worse of a parent than when you're like, is this how you do your homework? And they're like, no. But it was just the way he said it. I thank God that he doesn't listen to this show, because I'd get more noir, like it's just the way he cut that coming out of like a 5-year-old. Amazing.
I love it.
So Sophie Bugnol was born July 28th, 1957 to Georges and Marguerite Bugnol in the Lozère region in south central France. Georges was a dentist, while Marguerite went on to become the deputy mayor of Paris's 2nd arrondissement.
Oh.
I don't know exactly how many siblings that Sophie had, but I know she had 2 brothers, Bertrand and Stéphane. Sophie was described as luminous, intelligent, dynamic, independent, fearless, and spirited. After her death, her family said that Sophie had a rare physical and spiritual beauty, and that she was a loyal and generous friend who was often unhappy in love. They also said that while Sophie appeared very self-assured, she actually doubted her talent as a writer. Sophie filled many diaries and notebooks with random thoughts and short stories. She was particularly close with her Aunt Marie Madeline Opaka, who said that Sophie was, quote, the most beautiful baby I have ever seen, absolutely ravishing. From the moment she was born, I admired her. I was fascinated by her. According to her family, Sophie was the spitting image of her great Aunt Alice. Do I know what her great Aunt Alice looks like? No. Was there a point in bringing that up? Yes, I was bragging. There's not a lot. And so finding what I could, I was like, gotta put it in there. Oh no, I should have looked up the pronunciation on this. No, nuts. Sophie was baptized at St. Eustache Church, confirmed at Notre Dame Cathedral, and passed her baccalaureate at the Dominican convent in Rome. She was constantly attending art exhibitions, and she had a great passion for African art. On June 21st, 1980, Sophie married Pierre Jean Baudy. The couple welcomed a son, Pierre Louis Baudy, and while I can't get confirmation on the exact birth date, I can tell you he was born around 1981. Sophie and Pierre separated soon after and officially divorced on April 13th, 1983, after which Pierre Louis would live with his mother during the week. While working as a single mother, Sophie handled public relations for Unifrance, a French film promotion board, which was founded in 1983. Sophie was planning to resign, but when French film producer Daniel Toscan du Plantier became chairman of the board in 1988, he insisted that Sophie stay on until she found a new job. In 1989, Daniel invited Sophie to a dinner that was being hosted by Le Monde newspaper during the Cannes Film Festival. According to Daniel, the first thing that Sophie did at dinner was rip up her place card that said Daniel Duplantier Escort. When they returned to Paris, Daniel called Sophie at her office, which was on the Champs-Élysées, and asked her to stay, or asked to see her. She told him that she wasn't interested in going out with a married man, and when Daniel told her he was divorced, she asked that he send her mother proof that he was single. I know, I love it so much. So Daniel photocopied the lawyer's file, sent it to Sophie's mother, who said that Daniel had a bad reputation, but that Sophie was old enough to make her own decisions. Soon after, Daniel received a telegram that was just Sophie's phone number. And the reason I chose to add this story to my notes is because I think it showed what a spitfire that Sophie was in the best way. And there isn't a lot of information about her prior to her death, so I wanted to make sure to include something different that maybe people might not have heard. Now, before I get too far into Sophie's relationship with Daniel, I want us to become familiar with Daniel for later. So here's a Daniel Toscan du Plantier historical side note. Why did I have to keep saying this name? Daniel Toscan du Plantier was born April 7th, 1941 in Savoy. He started out as an advertising manager for a daily newspaper in 1966 and then became the director general of the Gaumont Film Company from 1975 to 1985. He then became the president of Unifrance in 1988 and remained in the role until his death in 2003. Regarding Daniel's private life, he married for the first time at 24 to a 21-year-old actress named Marie-Christine Barrault. The couple were married from 1965 to 1978, during which they had a son, David, in 1965, and a daughter, Ariane, in 1969. Then 41-year-old Daniel married 25-year-old actress Francesca Comencini. from 1982 to 1987, during which they had a son, Carlo, in 1983. And at some point during all of this, overlapping either one, if not both marriages, Daniel lived with an actress, Isabel Huppert, for 10 years.
Whoa, okay.
And allegedly had an affair with Isabella Rossellini.
Oh.
So
people
again,
have said I look like.
I can see it.
Yeah.
You're both timeless.
Oh, bless it.
And now we know why Sophie's mother said he had a bad reputation.
Yeah, good point.
A lot of things going on. So June 18th, 1991, 33-year-old Sophie married 50-year-old Daniel in a ceremony that was performed by Marguerite as the deputy mayor of Paris's second arrondissement. After the wedding, Sophie quit her job at Unifrance and started to establish herself as an independent film producer. I'm also realizing I probably should have been saying Unifrance to not be so harsh on you get what you get, folks. She hasn't done French since the 9th grade, and even that was barely getting by.
It's noir.
Yeah,
Unifrance.
Yeah, he would absolutely be doing that now. Like that just it really tickles me to this day. So Sophie was more of a homebody and not interested in attending the glamorous premieres and parties that her husband went to. She would accompany Daniel to these events in exchange for the couple going their separate ways. It is said that Sophie and Daniel had a non-traditional sort of marriage, as it seemed to be more of an open relationship. At various times, Sophie and Daniel both had other relationships throughout the marriage and both knew about them, but we will get into more on that later. In her teenage years, Sophie spent 2 summers living with a large family in Dublin called the McKiernans. I don't know how that all came about, but what I do know is the family had 10 children, and they would all drive around Ireland in a caravan. During those summers, Sophie fell in love with Ireland and decided one day she would buy a house there. So in 1993, Sophie and her cousin Alexandra spent weeks house hunting in Ireland until Sophie narrowed it down to 2 properties. One was tucked away in a rolling green hillside, and one was closer to the coast. As Sophie wrote in one of her diaries, quote, "It is difficult to choose between gentleness and violence." There was a lot in her journal that almost felt like foreshadowing, and then you just have to stop reading because it terrifies you that it's foreshadowing.
Oh, yeah. That's looming.
Yeah. In the end, Sophie chose the cottage in the West Cork area of Ireland near Tumor. It is said that the view from the bedroom window of the nearby Fastnet lighthouse was what officially won Sophie over. In fact, she loved the view so much she had her bed raised on a platform so she could see the view from bed, which is 100% something I would do, to be like, for the view? Yes, please. She liked the isolation of it and saw it as a retreat where she could write and recharge. The home was very minimalist, as there was no heat, very little furniture, but it was exactly what someone as solitary as Sophie was looking for. Sophie visited her Ireland home as much as possible, sometimes going alone, but sometimes taking her son or friends with her. Curious thing of note is that the locals all knew her by her maiden name.
Interesting.
Yeah. Since Sophie had been so busy with work, she'd only been in Ireland once in 1996. So since she hadn't been there since the spring and she had a bit of downtime from work, Sophie decided to make a last-minute trip to her holiday home, arriving at the airport on December 20th, 1996. Photos from the airport security camera was later released, showing her arriving alone. Before going to the airport, Sophie stopped at the hospital to visit her new nephew, Baptiste, who was born December 18th. Her family said during the visit, Sophie commented that she'd like to have a daughter. So Sophie arrived in Cork, Ireland on Friday, December 20th, with the plan to return to Paris on Monday, December 23rd. On Saturday, December 21st, Sophie was allegedly seen visiting some shops in Skull. Shopkeeper Marie Farrell told the Garda that between 2 and 3 p.m., Sophie had entered her shop, looked around, and left. During Sophie's visit, Marie noticed a man standing across the street watching the store. She described him as about 5'10", with a thin build, wearing a long black coat and a flat black hat. Marie said that after Sophie left her shop, the mysterious man followed in the same direction. On Sunday, December 22nd, Sophie visited 3 Castle Head on the Mizzen Peninsula, arriving at 1 p.m., which leads me to a Irish historical landmark side note.
Oh,
on the cliffs along the northern tip of the Mizzen, I could be saying that wrong, peninsula, sits the remains of the Dunloe Castle, originally founded in 1207 by Donna O'Mahony, who arrived in Ireland in 1169 and settled at the tip of the Mizzen Peninsula. The O'Mahony family remained at the castle for over 400 years until it was confiscated by the British Crown in 1627. Dunloe is one of the oldest castles in Southern Ireland that was built in the style of Norman architecture. The castle was constructed using dry stone masonry, which means no cement or lime were used in its construction, so it had to be fortified again in the 15th century. The remains of the castle consist of more than 100 feet of wall, which is about 15 to 20 feet high in some sections, and 3 towers, which is why it is often referred to as 3 Castle Head. 2 of the towers feature spiral staircases, and the largest of the 3 features a dungeon. The area is fairly isolated, and you can only access it by crossing through private farmland. A donation box has been set up for those who wish to visit. While visiting 3 Castle Head, Sophie Toscan du Plantier allegedly saw something that frightened her, so she ran to the nearest house that she knew, and that was the home of Yvonne and Tommy Ungerer. And what was it that Sophie allegedly saw? Well, that would be none other than the White Lady. Irish historical legends side note. Apparently, there are a few legends that surround 3 Castle Head. There is a legend that there is a treasure buried beneath the castle that will bring misfortune to those who find it. It is also said that there's gold at the bottom of the lake that's there. However, the bottom of the lake has never been reached. There's also a legend that dates back to the O'Donohues, the last family that lived at the castle. Apparently, the entire family died from either suicide or murder. Details are unclear, but because of this, it's said that a drop of blood drops from the tower to the lake every day, which sounds horrifying.
yeah.
The frightening vision that Sophie saw involves the White Lady, also known as the Lady of the Lake. Legend claims that anyone who sees the enchanted vision will die soon after.
Oh, God.
Yeah, some say that the White Lady can be explained by the fact that during the winter months, when the wind comes off the Atlantic Ocean, it raises froth on the lake that can look as though a woman dressed in white is walking the lake. It was later said that if the Ungerers knew about the legend, they would have insisted Sophie spend the night. But since they knew nothing of it, they didn't object when she left a short while later. Sophie left the Ungerers' house and went to O'Sullivan's pub for some tea and scones. The owner, Billy, said that Sophie mentioned nothing about seeing the White Lady. Billy invited Sophie to a party that he throws for the locals every Christmas. Sophie said she would possibly attend. Then she traveled back to her home in Tourmore and arrived about 9:30 p.m. Later that evening, Sophie made a few calls to friends and family around 10 p.m. One of her last calls was to her husband, Daniel, around 11 p.m. Daniel said that Sophie would call him every evening while she was away. She told him she would be returning to France the following day. Daniel would later say she sounded like she was falling asleep. It would be the last time that anyone spoke with Sophie. On the morning of December 23rd, one of Sophie's neighbors, Shirley Forster, planned to head to the nearby town of Skull to do some last-minute Christmas shopping. Just after 10 a.m., Shirley left her house and drove down the long driveway that went behind Sophie's house. When Shirley got to the end of the road at 10:10 a.m., she noticed something lying to her left in the briars near the gate. When Shirley took a closer look, she realized that it was a body. Some of the clothing had been caught on a barbed wire fence, but the head of the victim had been crushed and was so bloody that Shirley couldn't formally make an identification. Shirley started screaming and honking her horn to get the attention of her partner, Alfie Lyons, who was back at their house. He called the Garda, which is where my moment I would like to quickly point out, in Ireland, they refer to the police as the Garda. And while I'm used to calling them police, it didn't feel right. So throughout this entire thing, I'm going to call them the Garda, the Guard, or possibly even the Gardy. It depends how I'm feeling, because it just felt right. And that's just where we're at. And I'm unhinged. So join me. Since there had not been a murder in the area in over 70 years, the local Garda had no experience in an investigation of that magnitude. So yes, a lot of mistakes were made. Although I'm not sure we can blame inexperience for most of them, but we'll get into the mistakes later because first we need to talk about the crime scene. The Garda received a call around 10:15 a.m. stating that the body of a female was found lying on the side of a laneway just inside the gate. When the first Garda arrived on scene at 10:38 a.m., they noted Shirley's white car parked in the center of the lane. Once they saw the state of the body, they immediately roped off the area. Knowing that they'd need help with the situation, the Garda called investigators in Dublin, which is about 370 kilometers or 230 miles from Tremor, where the body was found. On a normal day, that drive would take about 4.5 hours, but due to the Christmas traffic, it took the Dublin Garda 7 hours, so they didn't arrive until 10 p.m.
Oh, wow.
In the meantime, state pathologist Dr. John Harbison was called, as he was the only state pathologist in Ireland at the time. Dr. Harbison was based in Dublin, so he couldn't get to the scene right away either. So as the local Garda waited for help, they called in local priest Father Denis Cashman, who arrived at 11:50 a.m. to administer last rites. A local freelance investigative journalist named Ian Bailey arrived on the scene at 2:20 p.m., but was told to leave by the guard. Bailey stayed on scene for a while longer and left between 3:30 and 4 p.m. Remember that name because unfortunately it resurfaces in our story. I couldn't find a time when it happened, but the Garda officially identified the body as that of Sophie Toscan du Plantier. She was just 39 years old. I should note that Sophie's brother was the one to officially identify the body on December 26th. Sophie's husband, Daniel, refused to travel to Ireland. Friends later said he was too distraught and not in any emotional or mental state to handle the trip. And as someone who has never experienced anything remotely close to that, I can't say that I blame him. But Sophie's parents made the trip to help identify the body, and I doubt they were in the best emotional or mental state at the time. But again, I don't know what the experience is like, so no shade to Daniel. I'm just stating facts at this point.
Of course.
Now, just a quick disclaimer that this murder was incredibly graphic. So some of what I talk about today might be difficult to hear. Not that I ever come on here to talk about rainbows or unicorns, but this murder was particularly gruesome. So I just want to give a heads up to those who may want to proceed with caution. And while this whole thing was already a tragedy, I feel it just makes it that much worse to know that the body was left in that spot while investigators waited for Dr. Harbison to arrive. The body was, of course, covered in sheets, and there was Garda present around the clock, but the pathologist didn't arrive until December 24th at 10 a.m. So Sophie's body was left lying in the laneway for 24 hours after it was discovered, which I find just that much more upsetting to add to everything.
Yeah.
But the Garda didn't want the body moved until she was seen by Dr. Harbison. But since he didn't start his exam until 24 hours after the body was found, it means that narrowing down a time of death is going to be difficult. The state pathologist is the one who deals with the specific cases where foul play is suspected. As of 2021, Ireland has one full-time chief state pathologist and 2 assistants. It appears the shortage of pathologists is worldwide, which is something we touched on in the Alonzo Brooks and Ryan Singleton episodes of the show. According to Discover magazine, in the United States, there has not only been pandemic deaths to deal with, but also the fact in some cities, homicide rates have doubled. And according to the CDC, in 2020, fatal drug overdoses increased by 30%. James Gill, the president of the National Association of Medical Examiners, said, quote, "There is a critical workforce shortage. Currently, there are estimated to be about 500 board-certified forensic pathologists working full-time. In order to cover all of the jurisdictions in the country, there would need to be over double that number." So I don't know if it's once again time for our passionate plea for our dear listeners to at least consider entering the field of pathology. But they should know up front, you won't be choosing the career for the money. I read that not only do forensic pathologists do an extra year of schooling compared to regular pathologists, they also make about $100,000 less. So yeah, I can see why there's a shortage.
Look, I'm not going to derail us, but we've got lots of things to talk about because we need to make some changes. We need more pathologists. If you, dear listeners, are a young person and you're looking for a job and you think you have the stomach for it, we will come to your graduation. We will come to your graduation when you're a fully certified pathologist. That stays on the table. And listen, we know that this is at least 5, 7, 10 years away from now. We never forget. We never forget.
Unless you're the one sending us messages constantly telling us to shut up, then we won't come.
We will not come. And we will cross-reference.
We'll background check. Of course we will. So the Dublin Garda arrived at 10 p.m. They had to wait in town for the local guard to be able to get to the crime scene because the location was so isolated that outsiders had a difficult time finding it. So they went to the local Garda station, but there was no one there. So they had to use a call box, over here we call it a phone booth, to contact someone who would take them to the crime scene. Apparently, because the call box was vandalized, one of the Dublin guards had to rewire the phone in order to use it.
Well, good on that officer. My gosh.
Yeah. So by the time the Dublin Garda arrived on scene, it was 11 p.m. And since the local guard didn't have the proper equipment, it wasn't until 11 p.m. when photographs were finally taken of the body. Sophie's body was found in the laneway about 150 feet or 50 yards from the house and just inside the gate, which was open when Shirley arrived. Sophie was dressed in a white nightgown, white leggings, hiking boots, and a dark blue robe. There were severe head and facial injuries, although I'm not sure the word severe even comes close to describing just how bad it was. Her skull was crushed, and she had suffered brain injuries caused by blunt force trauma from a heavy object. Near the body was a large flat stone that is believed to be the object that the killer used to subdue her. The killer then walked approximately 20 to 30 feet, picked up a 15-inch concrete block, which was part of a small hut that covered an electric water pump, carried it back to Sophie's body, where he dropped it on her head, crushing her skull. A blood-spattered concrete block was found at the scene. The thing about concrete is it's too porous to hold fingerprints, so the only evidence found on it was Sophie's blood. Organic matter from the killer was found under Sophie's fingernails, but police have never found a match. Since the murder, 3 sets of DNA tests have been conducted, and so far, all have come back inconclusive. Hairs were found in Sophie's hands, but they turned out to be her own. They assume she put her hands up to protect herself. One blood sample found at the crime scene revealed DNA that did not belong to Sophie. However, no match to that sample has ever been found. Bloodstains were found on the field, which indicated that Sophie had likely passed out or was immobile when the final blows occurred. Multiple bloody smudges and fingerprints were found on the 14-foot gate, which was seized as evidence. Another single bloody print was found on Sophie's back door. A partial shoe print was found, but so many people were in and out of that scene that the print was fairly useless. There was no sign of any sexual assault. I've seen photos from the crime scene and the autopsy, and I'm grateful they've never publicized any of the top half of the body, because just reading about it has been fairly horrific. The Dublin superintendent who arrived on scene is still so traumatized from it that to this day, he said if he closes his eyes, he can still see it. The idea that Sophie had to suffer through something so brutal is just so heartbreaking. And what those first responders had to see, especially for an area that hadn't had a murder in their lifetime, I just can't imagine. The laneway where Sophie was found was lined with barbed wire, a barbed wire fence that was covered in briars, which are plants that are covered in thorns. There were defensive wounds on Sophie's hands and numerous scrapes from the nearby briars. Because the body was so close to the briars, it is believed the killer would have scratched up their hands and possibly their arms, which is an important thing to write in your notes for those playing along at home.
Like me.
Yeah. Number one student.
Thank you.
The doors to Sophie's house were locked, and her keys were found hanging from the lock in the back door. Inside the house, nothing looked out of place. There was no sign of a struggle, no mess, no sign that anyone but Sophie had been inside. There were 2 wine glasses found on the drying board, which has led many to believe that that proves that Sophie had someone else in the house the day before the murder. But to that I say, she was only one person, so perhaps she didn't do dishes every single day and decided to do them all the night before she left, and she had 2 glasses of wine 2 different days. So to me, that makes sense, but I have nothing to base on that I feel like I'm right. But who knows? Maybe it was her and somebody else, but we will never know.
Yeah. And it's not, that's not, it's not like they found someone else's coat in the house or something. It's like 2 glasses that belonged to the house. Again, it's speculation in a court of law. It's a speculation.
Yeah. And on a drying board with a bunch of other dishes, it's like, you can't say those are from the same day even.
Right. If there was 2, on a coffee table, used, uncleaned,
there we go.
Perhaps different story, but to your point, I agree that's unfortunately circumstantial.
The Garda believed that Sophie was chased from her home and that she ran down the lane to get help. The killer caught up with her at the gate, hit her from behind, knocking her unconscious, and then repeatedly struck her. They believe the killer inflicted at least 50 blows.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's the way to describe this that I saw that is the most fitting, over the top.
Yeah.
Like, this went so far. This is someone snapped and kind of blacked out, but I mean, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
According to author Ralph Riegel, found upstairs on Sophie's bed was a poetry book lying open to the poem A Dream of Death by William Butler Yeats. And whenever I hear that name, I immediately think of the rom-com Must Love Dogs, starring John Cusack and Diane Lane. And I know it was never a popular movie, but I adored it. Like, I went through a phase years ago where I was watching it every single week. It also stars Stockard Channing and Elizabeth Perkins, who I love as well. And since this is my 2nd episode in a row mentioning a Diane Lane movie, because previously on True Crime and Cocktails, I mentioned Hollywoodland. I want to shout out Diane Lane and say you are fabulous, and I am sorry that I didn't shout you out last time because you deserved it, especially because I'm realizing she played Superman's mom in the Henry Cavill movie, so now it was a real misstep on my behalf to not shout her out last week. So shout out Diane Lane. She just seems like an all-around nice lady. And that, dear listeners, is what I do when a case gets particularly brutal to talk about. I go off on tangents on things that make me happy in an attempt to cast a tiny bit of light into the darkness that is brutal murder. But back to the murder. According to Dr. Harbison's report, there were, quote, severe head injuries, gaping wounds on the right side of the forehead, and the right ear was severely lacerated at its lower edge. Beside the deceased's left shoulder and head was a flat slate like a stone, which was heavily bloodstained. There were scratches on her neck, head, hands, and legs, as well as a long scratch on the inside of one of her forearms and visible lacerations between the first 2 fingers of her left hand. There were also a series of marks or lacerations on Sophie's neck, which appear to be consistent with a Doc Martens style boot. The idea that someone also then put their foot on her neck, that level of anger again I can't.
Yeah.
Official cause of death was blunt force trauma with multiple injuries to the victim's head, fractures to the skull causing brain damage, and multiple fractures to the right temple, right front face, and left eye socket. I didn't write this down, but her mother, Marguerite, said that when they went to identify the body, they basically had to build a mask for her face to be like, this is as close as we can get. And she said she looked at it and went, that's not my daughter, and left and had to have other people come in and do it. But you know what? She did go. Wasn't pleasant, Daniel, but she went. No shade to Daniel. He's never going to hear this.
Nope. Well, he's dead.
Yeah. I didn't want to point that out again, but yeah.
Have podcasts in heaven. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, according to the negative comments, it won't be ours. Or no, maybe it'll be ours, but it'll start right off the bat with the case.
I love it.
Who knows?
I love it.
The autopsy estimated time of death to be between 11 p.m. December 22nd and 6 a.m. December 23rd. But due to the fact that the body was outside for more than 24 hours and due to the varying temperatures, narrowing down the time any further is nearly impossible. Toxicology confirmed that there were no narcotics or medications in Sophie's system. On July 2nd, 2008, Sophie's body was exhumed and a second autopsy was performed. Pathologist Mark Tecone later testified in court that he noticed that the spine was intact and that there were no injuries to the lower limbs. He mentioned a fracture to the thorax, which came from being, quote, battered considerably, and that Sophie's injuries were consistent with her skull being crushed. The new autopsy noted multiple scratches and wounds on Sophie's neck, head, hands, including fractures to the metacarpal bones on both hands. For the non-medical listeners who, like me, have no idea what a metacarpal is, they're the main bones in the hand between the bones of the wrist and your fingers. Basically, and I love that I'm going to attempt to do this way. Basically, for those viewing, I need to make sure I have the right words. You starting at the wrist and going up. It goes the carpals. All of this here is metacarpals. And then, heaven help me, the fingers, which are the proximal, intermediate, and distal phalanges.
Phalanges, yeah.
Phalanges, sure. I'm
Well
not showing off. I'm just proving that I looked up actual bone names, people.
I never doubted you, and I'm impressed. And what I thought you were going to do is the wrist bone's connected to the.
Oh my
So
God.
you impressed me. You impressed me.
Why didn't I? That would have made way more sense. The whole point is basically
The back of your hand.
both of them were broken.
Right. Oh,
So,
God.
Yeah.
So not your fingers, not your wrist, the back of your hand proper for those who are listening, not watching.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And if you are watching, I'm sorry. I'll post a photo of it somewhere. And
Yeah.
to all of the medical professionals that are listening and cringing at me, I'm so sorry. And to Lisa Kudrow, I go, Regina Phalange, for no reasons other than I can. So, according to the pathologist, the fractured metacarpal bones show, quote, the considerable force put up by the victim to defend herself. The original autopsy had noted an indentation on the ground beneath Sophie's head that indicated she was on the ground during the final blows. The new autopsy confirmed Dr. Harbison's original findings. Unfortunately, no further clues were found during the second autopsy that could help the case. So Sophie's body was then cremated. Some have claimed that dried fruit and nuts were found in her stomach contents, but I wasn't able to confirm that. Now, Sophie's murder was a shock to the people of West Cork. It was the first homicide in the county in over 70 years. That victim, in particular, was politician Michael Collins, who was a member of the Sinn Féin party, which was dedicated to achieving independence for all of Ireland. Collins was assassinated by Republican extremists on August 22nd, 1922. And you know who played Michael Collins in the 1996 biopic? Ever so coolly, Mr. Liam Neeson.
Ever so coolly.
I love how yours amps up more and more every time.
If you're a first-time listener to the show, we love the movie Love Actually, and that's my unhinged impression of Liam Neeson. It's not serious. It's a joke. Please don't come for me. I'm only kidding.
We love him so much. It's outrageous.
Yep.
It's outrageous. Yep. But now that I've said it out loud, isn't it eerie that up until Sophie's murder, the last murder in the county was Michael Collins, and that a movie about Michael Collins was released the same year that the next murder in the county happened?
Ooh.
That feels like a weird coincidence, sort of. It just feels, the timing of it all feels
like a creepy synchronicity. I'll say that much.
Yeah. The investigation, January 11th, 1997, a woman used a call box to contact the Garda anonymously. Referring to herself as Fiona, the woman claimed she saw a man on Kilfada Bridge at 3 a.m. on the night of Sophie's murder. Then the woman hung up. Kilfada Bridge is about 0.9 miles or 1.5 kilometers south of Sophie's house, and it's the only road from Skull to Goleen that leads to Sophie's house. The guard made a public plea for Fiona to contact them again, and she did. She tells them again she saw this man on the bridge that night. He's wearing a long black coat and a black hat. Then she hung up. Once again, the Garda make a public plea for Fiona to call. And when Fiona calls a third time, she calls to tell them, I am not coming forward. However, this time she called from a landline, so the guard were able to trace the call and learn that Fiona was actually Marie Farrell, the woman who claimed to have seen Sophie in her shop on December 21st. Marie claims that on the night of Sophie's murder, Marie and an ex-boyfriend were driving near Kilfada Bridge. She didn't want to make a public statement about it because Marie was married and she didn't want her husband to think she was cheating, which Marie says she most certainly was not. But Marie worried that this would ruin her marriage, so for the sake of her children, she didn't want to come forward. She told her husband she was going out for Christmas drinks with her girlfriends, but she was honestly going for a drink with an old boyfriend who was also married. Marie said that her husband could never hear the man's name, and despite testifying in this case multiple times, Marie refused to officially say the man's name until after the man had died in like 2005 or something. The quote from Marie that stuck out to me was, quote, my husband said I was having an affair, which I absolutely wasn't.
Well, I mean, in my opinion, if you're sneaking around and not telling your partner the truth because you're going to meet an ex-boyfriend, you've already cheated. Like, the cheating is the lying. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that people associate cheating with
boning.
with boning. And yes, I get that. But I think that the cheating, like emotional cheating is in my opinion, is a thing. And
100%.
if you're sneaking around and keeping secrets and to the point that you're not coming forward about potential information in a murder, you cheated.
Yeah.
You cheated, Marie.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. I'm not saying she was having an affair. In fact, I don't care if she was. It's her business.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised she didn't want to tell her husband or have him know anything about it, as Christopher Farrell, also known as Christy, which I don't care for, has been arrested multiple times for assault since 1996. So yeah, I can see why she wouldn't want him unnecessarily angered. And just to clarify, I'm not suggesting her husband was ever abusive towards her. I'm just suggesting if he was known for being physical with people, I can understand why she wouldn't want him pushed. On January 22nd, 1997, Marie made an official statement with the police, once again talking about the man she had seen watching Sophie outside of her shop. She describes the man as very tall, which is interesting since on December 27th, she said he was about 5'9". Also in this new statement, Marie claimed that the man she saw in town on December 21st was the same man she saw on Kilfata Bridge on December 23rd, which is also a leap since she was supposedly saw this man as she drove past him in the middle of the night. You wouldn't think she would have a chance to get a good enough look at his face to make such a distinction. And then that same man came into Marie's shop. So she ran to a nearby Garda and told him that is the man that I saw. The guard told her that man is Ian Bailey, the local investigative journalist who was the first media on the scene of Sophie's murder. Again, Marie's description of the man started off as about 5'9", 5'10", with a slim build. Then it changed to very tall. And now she's saying that it was Ian Bailey, who is 6'2" and quite broad. So already it's not adding up, but the guard think they've got their man. And while the investigation started with about 50 suspects, within the first 2 weeks, the guard had eliminated all of them but one. And once they had Marie's statement, they felt their case was coming together. So on February 10th, 1997, Ian Bailey was arrested for the murder of Sophie Toscan du Plantier.
Oh boy, I know this is just getting started and I already have so many notes and so many questions, but let's take a quick break right now, hit the can, grab another drink, and we're going to be right back on this episode of True Crime and Cocktails discussing Sophie, a murder in West Cork. All right, what we going to do? Time for clap number 2. 1, 2, 3. Welcome back to this episode of True Crime and Cocktails. We're, of course, discussing Sophie, a murder in West Cork. We left off with a real cliffhanger because Ian Bailey was just arrested for Sophie's murder. And it feels like maybe there's more to learn about Mr. Ian Bailey. Not to be confused with Ian Ziering.
Well, I mean, if I got to the arrest and case closed by that point, then there would be a problem with me bringing it up that early. But
yeah.
It's not early, folks. We've got a way to go. Ian Bailey, I could honestly do multiple full 3-hour length episodes just talking about Ian Bailey. I don't want to, but I could. He's a character, we'll say.
Okay.
One quote I saw about Bailey is, quote, "You can't avoid Ian in this story. It's only because Ian constantly inserts himself into the story."
Whoa.
Mm-hmm. And we're at a point where there is just so information, but again, conflicting reports. So it's tough to decide what to cover, what not to cover, but I'm going to try and make this as succinct as possible. So yes, there are going to be some details you might know about this case that I don't mention. But for the sake of time, I'm just going to keep trying to focus on the main stuff. And then I probably get distracted. I don't know. I made half of these notes in a real rush this afternoon. So my brain is not here today, I don't think. And so I'm not sure what's in here. So all of us together down the yellow brick road.
Well, you're doing great.
Ian Bailey was born January 27th, 1957 in Manchester. He worked as a freelance journalist and married a woman named Sarah Limbrick in 1980. The couple divorced 5 years later, and Bailey moved to Ireland in 1991. In the mid-90s, he was supplementing his income by raising and butchering turkeys.
Oh.
Not connected to the crime, but it's true crime, so I'm mentioning it. Side note. That one took up a full length of page.
Those are always my favorite to write.
Oh, well, it just feels right? You got to get the joy where you can find joy.
Absolutely.
And just a warning, this is brutal.
Oh, God.
After the couple separated, Sarah had a son named Jamie Limbrick. From what I can tell, he is not Bailey's biological son. 17-year-old Jamie was staying at an outbuilding on a property owned by his grandparents near Gloucester. On September 3rd, 2003, while his grandparents were on holiday, Jamie entered the main house in the middle of the night to watch porn.
Okay.
I've heard, and I've seen multiple reports, and I don't want to believe it's true, but I heard that he went looking after the porn. He went looking for a sheep, but couldn't find one. So he went upstairs and raped and strangled his great-grandmother, 93-year-old Marjorie Davis. Then he set fire to the house. He pleaded guilty in March 2005, and after a 12-week stay at a mental facility, was sentenced to be detained in a high-security mental facility, quote, without limit of time. Medical professionals found that Jamie suffers from a severe personality disorder and suggested he might suffer from a psychopathic disorder as well. And I know that had nothing to do with today's case, but you know I like to add in extra true crime when I can. And because it's someone who's linked to something, that's how it came in. And when I found out, I was like, well, now they all have to know too.
That was a natural connection. I would have included it if I were you as well. I do just want to ask the question that I hate to ask. Did she survive the fire?
She did not.
I didn't think she did.
I do believe she was dead before the fire was set.
I think my brain just skipped that part. Like, I think I was just like, it just hiccuped, and I wanted to believe that maybe there was something, but no. Okay, great.
No, there's not. Again, just clarify. People online are like, is it possible it was his son? Is it a thing? And from what I can tell, they were not together in the timing to make that work. So no, I did not mention this because he was possibly his son. I mentioned this because he is the son of his first wife. So it connected.
Yeah, no, it absolutely connects. So she had him with someone else after they had divorced?
Yes.
Got it.
So Bailey moved to Ireland in 1991 and started going as like Owain in an attempt to sound more Irish, I guess. In 1992, he moved in with Jules Thomas in Goleen. At first, Bailey just lived in a secondary building on her property, but soon the couple began a romantic relationship. It's worth noting that during Bailey's first arrest on February 10th, 1997, Jules Thomas was arrested along with him. Jules was soon released, but was arrested again in 2000 when she was subsequently released. So what led to Bailey's first arrest? Well, Marie Farrell's statement about seeing him near Sophie's house on the night of the murder played a role, But also, so did the fact that as a journalist, Bailey's articles contained information that had not been made public. So, such as how Sophie had died, the fact that she hadn't been assaulted. And in a December 29th article, he wrote, quote, "The evidence indicates that she was pursued down the rocky track from her home and killed by repeated blows to the back of the head." And I know that sources are a thing and it's possible he got his information from them, but this is stuff that only the guard would have known. And the guard certainly wasn't talking to him because they immediately thought of him as a suspect. So where is he getting this information from? And then there's the fact that Bailey and Jules couldn't keep their stories straight about where they were the night before Sophie was found. In their first statements to the Garda, they both said that Bailey had been in bed all night. Then Jules retracted her statement and said Bailey had gotten out of bed about an hour after they went to bed at 10 p.m. and then returned to the house at 9 a.m. with a new cut on his forehead. Bailey changed his story to say he'd gotten up at 4 a.m. and did some writing in an outbuilding, which is considered the studio, and then returned to bed. But he acts like the outbuilding is quite close, but it's like hundreds of feet from the building. So it's like once you're out there, you could have gone anywhere. And a witness claimed to see a large bonfire happening on Jules's property around December 26th. When the Garda looked into it, they claimed to find remnants of a mattress, as well as what appeared to be buttons from a coat and eyelets from boots. So investigators start to believe that Bailey burned the clothing he was wearing the night he allegedly murdered Sophie. Then there's the timing of it all. When Eddie Cassidy, the editor for the Irish Examiner, first got word that there had been a murder in West Cork, he immediately contacted Ian Bailey as he was the closest journalist to the scene. Eddie said he contacted Bailey and said that someone had been murdered. Bailey then told people that a French woman had been murdered, but Eddie hadn't mentioned that the victim was French because he didn't have that information at the time. Also, Eddie's call came in around 2 p.m. and allegedly Bailey, who was meant to deliver a turkey to a customer, called the customer before noon to say he has to postpone the delivery because a French woman was murdered. And even while Bailey was being investigated by the guard, he was still releasing news articles about Sophie, once claiming that she had, quote, multiple male companions, which from the best I can tell, she did not. In the days after the murder, it was noted that Bailey had numerous scratches on his hands and forearms, as well as a small cut to his forehead. You may recall from earlier, I mentioned the Garda believed, due to the briars at the scene, the killer would have received scratches to his hands and arms. Well, Bailey claimed he climbed a tree to cut off the top to use it as a Christmas tree, and that's why his arms were all scratched. Oh, and the cut on his forehead? Well, when he strung up one of the turkeys to kill it, its foot hit him in the head and it clawed his forehead. The thing about the scratches on his arms, the local Garda didn't have a camera to take a photo of Bailey's hands. So they drew a sketch.
No.
And they entered it into their file. I will post a photo because it's like, did you literally trace your own hand on the paper, guy? Like you may as well turn it to the side and make it a turkey. Come on.
This reminds me of the case, and I can't remember which case it was, forgive me, but remember where the drawing was just a blank head? It was just a remember?
Was that Madeleine McCann?
I think it might have been, but it was another one of those where it was like, guys, just don't even bother. Like, what are you doing? It's not helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't use that in court. You can't use a drawing of a hand, can you? I mean, maybe you can. I don't feel like it would go very well, but.
Yeah. Well, I wrote in my notes as though that would be admissible in court at all or useful in any way.
Thank you.
So we're on the same wavelength there.
Thank you.
But I'll post it because it's the small bit of ridiculous in this whole thing.
Please.
Later on, an officer climbed the tree and then came back down to show that he had no scratches on his hands at all. And for some reason, they took photos of those hands. That's though that would ever be needed.
Where was the camera in the interim? Like, where they were like, guys, we made some missteps. Yesterday we didn't have a camera. Lewis, make sure you bring your camera. Like, that's just rich. Very rich.
It's a lot. Bailey was arrested a second time on January 27th, 1998, his 41st birthday. However, the Irish courts felt there wasn't enough evidence to go to trial, and Bailey was once again released. In December 2003, Bailey sued 8 newspapers for defamation. In January 2004, Judge Patrick Moran ruled that all 8 newspapers had been justified in calling Bailey the chief suspect in Sophie's murder. However, Bailey was awarded damages against the Mirror and the Sun as they failed to prove other allegations that they had made. The judge also said, quote, Mr. Bailey is a man who likes a certain amount of notoriety, that he likes perhaps to be in the limelight, that he likes a bit of self-publicity. And during that libel trial, some of Bailey's dark history came to light. It was pointed out that between 1993 and 2001, Bailey had physically assaulted his partner, Jules Thomas, on at least 3 separate occasions. In August 1993, Bailey wrote in his diary, quote, I actually tried to kill her. In May 1996, Bailey wrote, quote, I severely damaged you and made you feel death was near. During the 1996 assault, one of Jules's daughters went to the neighbor's house for help. Peter Bielecki arrived to take Jules to the hospital, and he later testified, quote, Jules was curled up in an almost fetal position at the foot of the bed and was making these terrible animal-like noises. She had some hair in her hands. Her eye was purple. There was blood coming out of it. Her face had gouges in it. She had teeth marks on her arm. It was the most appalling thing I had ever witnessed. And I've seen photos from that particular assault, and he pulled a massive chunk out of her hair. Her eye was nearly swollen shut. She needed stitches inside her mouth, and she had bruising all over her body. And I hate that this woman had to endure this, but that she had to go through it multiple times. After this incident, the couple separated when Jules got a protection order against Bailey, but sadly, the couple ended up back together. In 2001, Bailey was convicted of assaulting Jules in the face, body, and limbs with a crutch because she woke him up from a nap. The psychiatrist's report, which was written for the murder trial, concluded that Bailey had a, quote, personality constructed on narcissism, psychorigidity, violence, impulsiveness, egocentricity, with an intolerance to frustration and a great need for recognition. Under the liberating effects of alcohol, he had a tendency to become violent. Jules was asked about the assaults, and she said, quote, I never felt threatened by him. It only happens once every 4 or 5 years. She added that she was much more afraid of her previous partner, who also used to assault her, but that Bailey had promised he'd never do it again. She said that he likes to get like that with whiskey. Quote, whiskey has a terrible effect on him. I cannot trust him when he drinks whiskey. When asked why she didn't leave Bailey years before, Jules said, quote, I can't kick him out. He'd be homeless. And, quote, you don't walk out on someone in the middle of ghastly times. It'd be completely against my nature to do that. The thing that gets me about this whole situation is that Jules claims that Bailey was very remorseful for hurting her. And while Bailey refers to the abuse as his eternal shame, I'm not sure how remorseful he genuinely is. When asked about the assaults, I've read that at least 5 occurred. Bailey said, quote, we'd both been drinking and she grabbed me and I pushed her and hurt her in the process. I'd have to take full responsibility, but I mean, it does take 2, you know. It takes 2 to tango. And all of this came about because of the libel trial. So the very trial that Bailey pushed for to clear his name ended up destroying his reputation. Other things to mention about the libel trial before we move on. Some claim that Bailey admitted to being violent with his first wife, Sarah, but of course, he now denies that he said that. During the libel trial, one witness claimed that Bailey told him he once blacked out, and when he came to, he realized he was strangling his wife. Bailey now denies it. The most Bailey will say about his marriage to Sarah is that their relationship was, quote, stormy. One article even suggested that Bailey's marriage ended when his first wife discovered that he'd taken out a large life insurance policy on her without her knowledge, forging her signature. I could not find out if that was accurate or not, but at the end of the trial, Bailey was awarded 8,000 euros or nearly 9,300 US dollars in damages against the Mirror and the Sun newspapers for publishing reports regarding Bailey and his first wife. So who knows? Also at the libel trial, Marie Farrell testified that she had seen Bailey at Kilfada Bridge on the night of Sophie's murder, and that after that, Bailey started to threaten Marie in an attempt to scare her off from testifying. Marie claimed that Bailey held a finger to his temple like a gun, ran his finger across his throat in a threatening gesture, and that he would make threatening phone calls. In 2005, out of nowhere, Marie Farrell retracted her statement. She then said it was the Garda who had threatened her into testifying, saying that they know with 100% certainty Ian Bailey killed Sophie Toscan du Plantier, and that if they don't get a proper witness against him, that Bailey will kill again. Marie then said that none of her previous statements involving Ian Bailey had been true, although she does stand by the fact that she saw a man in a black coat walking the Kilfada Bridge on the night of Sophie's murder, but now she's saying the man had a tan, sallow face and long, thin features. So she's changing it up. But one thing I find curious is that according to the Irish Times, Marie first retracted her statement after she had multiple meetings with Bailey's lawyer. Do with that information what you will. An independent investigation was done and found no evidence that Marie Farrell was ever coerced or intimidated by the Garda. Other people who testified at the trial was Bill Fuller, a landscaper who said that Bailey one night told him, quote, this is his words, not mine, "You fucker, you saw her in the spar that day before she was killed, and you saw her tight arse and wanted to give her one. When you went into her house at 2 a.m, she ran away screaming because you scared her. You chased her to calm her down, but it stirred something in the back of your head, and you realized you went too far and had to finish her off." Which is a wild thing to say to anybody, but clearly Ian Bailey likes to write a story. Another person, Malachi Reed, testified that in late 1996, Bailey gave him a ride home from town, and when Malachi asked him how work was going, Bailey responded, quote, "I went up there and bashed her fucking brains in with a rock." Since Malachi was only 14 at the time, he didn't know what to do, so he waited until the next day before telling his mother, who then went to the guard. Bailey said that these confessions were simply his dark sense of humor and that he was just reiterating what people were already saying about him. And I know that I make jokes when I'm uncomfortable, but to joke about brutally and violently killing someone feels like, I don't know, not the choice to make.
Yeah.
In May 2013, Bailey won the High Court order, which gave him access to the file that the Garda had on him, which included 20,000 documents. In 2015, Bailey lost a wrongful arrest case against the Garda, Minister for Justice, and Attorney General. Now, back in 2007, the Association for the Truth on the Murder of Sophie Toscan du Plantier, née Bunel, was founded by Sophie's family to help re-energize the investigation. They get together once a month to discuss news about the case as well as any potential leads. It is currently kind of headed by Sophie's uncle as well as her son. Their efforts to keep pressure on the French police led the Garda to issuing a third European arrest warrant for Ian Bailey on December 16th, 2019. But this time, the arrest was coming from France, not Ireland. Bailey managed to get out on bail and instructed his lawyer to appeal the extradition. Ireland refused to send him to France, so France went ahead with the trial and tried Bailey in absentia. In 2019, Bailey was convicted of Sophie's murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. However, Bailey was still in Ireland, so the French court tried to have Bailey extradited to serve his sentence. On October 12, 2020, a judge ruled that Bailey would not be extradited. The Irish state chose not to appeal the High Court ruling against the extradition, so as of now, Ian Bailey is free. Although he can't leave Ireland because the third arrest warrant is outstanding, and since he was found guilty in France, he could still be sent to prison. But if he stays in Ireland, he's safe. To be found guilty of murder in one court, but found not guilty in another of the same crime is frustrating and confusing, and I don't get it. So on one hand, the Garda are convinced that Bailey is Sophie's killer, and I get it. He rubbed me the wrong way the first interview of his that I watched. And then there's the fact that he couldn't keep his story straight about where he was during Sophie's murder, and the fact that he outright confessed to numerous people about it, and the history of violence towards a woman. But on the other hand, there's no physical evidence. There's no DNA or fingerprint evidence of Bailey's that was found at the scene. But there's a lot that doesn't add up about Ian Bailey. For one thing, Bailey claims that he never even met Sophie. However, several witnesses have since contradicted this. Then there's the fact that he hasn't been consistent regarding his whereabouts from when Sophie was murdered. And then, of course, the random confessions he made to about 7 or 8 people, which is wild to me. And while no one deserves to be falsely accused, Jules especially didn't deserve to go through any of the bullshit she went through. People were sending them threatening letters, bullets, even hypodermic needles in the mail. They were harassed with calls, reporters at their front door nearly all the time. And again, no innocent person deserves to be treated that way, but especially her. She didn't do anything wrong, and this whole thing nearly destroyed her life. Part of me is almost convinced that Bailey didn't do it, but that he confessed to people just to get attention. Because if I've learned anything about Ian Bailey, it's that he loves the spotlight. Like the part in one of the documentaries that I watched where he inexplicably just pulls out one of his own teeth with a pair of pliers.
What?
No explanation is given. Just a man standing in front of a camera in a winter hat performing self-dental surgery. What's more normal than that? Yeah, they don't say anything. It's just him struggling, and he rips it out and then he shows it to the camera, and it's like, awesome. What's up? Like, why was that even added? And I don't have time to get into all of it, but Bailey claims that while he was working as a journalist in England, that, quote, Princess Diana always had an eye for me.
Oh, stop.
When asked about it specifically, he said, quote, the thing I remember about Diana was that she seemed to have a habit of flirting, using her sapphire blue eyes to great effect. I was almost always the tallest member of the press pack, and our eyes would meet. She seemed playful and would flutter her peepers at me. And if I never hear this man speak about a woman again, it will be too soon, although I appreciate the usage of peepers. Jules described Bailey as, quote, it's like he's performing all the time. He's over the top. Watching her, I can't remember which specific documentary it was. I think it was the Murder at the Cottage. But on one of those episodes, he's watching something on TV about a trial or about something. And he's like going off about it and talking about it. And Jules is sitting there and she's exhausted. And he's like, can I come over? maybe get a hug. And she's just like, stop. And he's just like, you don't want to hug me? And I'm like, dude, her body language alone is like, leave me alone. Like, you could tell she was so tired. It's like, just stop playing around. It's just too much. My next note, I love he's egotistical and rubs me the wrong way. But that doesn't mean that he murdered Sophie. He has proven in the past he is capable of an incredible violence, but there was no physical evidence of him at the scene of the crime. Because again, they found DNA and blood that wasn't hers. And Ian has given blood samples, hair samples, all of it willingly. It's never matched. In 2001, Sophie's case was looked at from a fresh perspective. Investigators ignored any circumstantial evidence, such as the scratches, and reanalyzed statements, re-interviewed witnesses, looked into other suspects who had been previously ignored. Unfortunately, the investigation revealed no new suspects, but the French, of course, are convinced that Ian Bailey committed this crime. But to do our due diligence, we need to look at suspects that aren't Ian Bailey. So then I start to wonder who some suspects could be. So I then, of course, next logical step for me anyway, start looking into the statistics on femicide in Ireland.
Yeah.
Femicide being the unlawful killing of women and girls. I read a report written by Women's Aid titled Behind Closed Doors that looked at femicide between 1996 and 2016. According to their research, in 1996, by May, 8 women had been killed, which was more than the total for the previous year. And by the end of 1996, 19 women had been murdered, which represented 45% of all murder cases in Ireland. And between 1996 and 2016, 209 women were killed in Ireland, with an additional 16 children that were killed alongside their mothers. Of those victims, 63% were killed in their own homes. In 55% of the cases, a weapon of some sort was involved. And if these numbers aren't horrifying enough, of those 209 cases, 79% are considered solved, 6% are awaiting trial, and 15% are unsolved. And the cases that were considered solved, 54% of the victims were murdered by a past or current intimate male partner. So it's logical for us to look in the direction regarding Sophie's murder, which means we need to look at the husband, Daniel.
Yes.
And while this is my moment to go into all the stuff about Daniel that I find suspicious, honestly, there's not a lot. Was he kind of a creep with women for constantly having overlapping relationships? Yes. But since he seemed to have some sort of understanding with Sophie where they would be in extramarital relationships, then what would Daniel's motive be? Is it possible that Daniel wanted to leave Sophie and she didn't want to separate? Maybe. But even if he wanted her dead, to kill her in such an absolutely brutal way, I just don't buy it. But maybe it doesn't matter what I think about Daniel either way, because at the time of Sophie's murder, Daniel was at his home in Toulouse, France, approximately 1,000 miles or 1,600 kilometers away. And while we're looking at intimate partners, there is also 35-year-old French artist Bruno Carbonet, who dated Sophie from 1992 to 1993. Bruno had been to the house in Ireland a few times. In fact, he went with her the very first time she visited the house and helped her set it up. Bruno said they stayed for a few weeks around Easter 1993, and that he returned with her 2 or 3 times after that. Bruno states that from the last time he was at Sophie's holiday home was the summer of 1993. Bruno said that their relationship ended in December 1993, and he admits he took it hard because it was so out of the blue. Friends of Sophie's say that Sophie found Bruno to be possessive, and that after their split, Sophie went back to Daniel. Bruno said that he last spoke with Sophie in November 1996, because she had bought a painting of his that he wanted to include in an exhibit in January 1997. At the time of Sophie's murder, Bruno was at an art auction in the south of France. The Garda allegedly spent a week in France corroborating Bruno's story. The thing that I don't get is, was he at an art auction or was he at home? Because I've seen both. I've seen claims he was absolutely at this art auction. I've also seen claims he was at home in Paris because he has an invoice for a telephone installation at his apartment on December 23rd. So what's the truth? I honestly don't know. It's driving me mad.
Well, that's the first person that I've heard that has a motive.
Yeah.
Right? Someone who's possessive, who admits that he took the breakup hard, that he had been in contact with her a month before she was killed. This is the first person that I've heard that has any sort of story that makes sense.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about Ian obviously at the end when we get into our thoughts and theories and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, interesting, very interesting.
Yeah. But according to sources, the Guard eliminated both Daniel and Bruno as suspects because their stories could be backed up and they both had solid alibis. So if the Garda didn't think it was Daniel or Bruno, who else was on their suspect list? Well, the Guard also looked into a man, Karl-Heinz Wollny, a musician from East Germany who moved to West Cork with his wife in late 1989, early 1990, after the fall of the Berlin Wall. From my understanding, the couple soon split and the wife returned to Germany. In December 1996, Wollny was living in a house in West Cork about a mile or 1.6 kilometers from Sophie's house. On the night of Sophie's murder, Wollny was playing a gig in Crookhaven, which is about 8.6 miles or 13.8 kilometers from Tourmoor, where Sophie's house was located. Wollny claims that after the show, he headed home, but of course, he lives alone, so he has no alibi to confirm this. Wollny was a suspect early on in their investigation, as it had been suggested that Wollny and Sophie were potentially linked romantically. To the best of my knowledge, no one has ever offered any proof of this relationship. Wollny told the Guard that he did not see Sophie in December 1996 and that he'd actually never met her. Allegedly, in early 1997, Wollny told a friend that he had, quote, done a terrible thing and that he couldn't live with himself. He never specified what that thing was. Wollny died by suicide in February 1997. And unfortunately, that's where the information on Karl-Heinz Wollny ends. I wish there was more so I could elaborate. Apparently, years later, the friend became quite ill, so told the police everything that Wollny had told him. The friend has since passed, so since that is the only information I have on him, you'll just have to make of it what you will.
Yeah.
There was also a suspect who was allegedly a peeping Tom in the area, as the man had a reputation for looking into windows. The man's name was never publicly released, and for reasons I don't know, the Guard eliminated him as a suspect pretty early on. Is it possible that the police had such tunnel vision for Ian Bailey that they eliminated suspects without properly looking into them? It's possible. But these suspects aside, what about someone who wasn't ever on the Guard's radar? Of the cases that I mentioned earlier regarding femicide in Ireland, of the 209 victims between 96 and 2016, 54% were killed by an intimate male partner, 33% were killed by a male relative or acquaintance. Now, from what I can tell, all of Sophie's male relatives were in France at the time, although I know now she has a brother living in New York. I don't know if he was living in New York then or not, but I just don't see any motive for any of these men to murder her in such a brutal and personal way. So for the sake of time, I'm skipping the possibility of the perp being a family member. And in the grand scheme of anything is possible, could it have been a family member? Sure, it could have been anybody. But again, they had DNA. There would have been a similar DNA match to her. It would have helped narrow it down.
Yeah.
But we have more other possibilities to speak about. So if it's not a family member, what about an acquaintance? The Garda have suggested that Sophie ran down the lane towards the gate as she was fleeing her attacker. But my question is, why would she run down the lane when there was a house on either side of her? Why not run to one of those houses? Is it because the attacker was one of those neighbors? The laneway was the only road that could access the three houses. The first one was Sophie's. Then to the east was a holiday home owned by a British family called the Richardsons. To the west was a home of Shirley Forster, who discovered Sophie's body. Living with Shirley at the time was her partner, Alfie Lyons. So I don't have a lot of info on Alfie Lyons, but what I did find intrigued me. Now, I couldn't officially confirm this, but I really want to talk about it anyway.
Yes, please.
I heard that Lyons allegedly had a bit of a heated dispute with Sophie over the property line. Apparently, there is an outbuilding that he believed belonged to him, but Sophie believed belonged to her. And there was an issue over the gate. Sophie preferred to keep the gate closed at all times. Lyons wanted it open. Is it possible, in the grand scheme of anything's possible, that Sophie glanced outside at night after she'd gotten home? Her bed was propped up high enough she'd be able to see down below. She looks outside. She sees Lyons is leaving the gate open, or that the gate's open, and that she gets up out of bed, puts on a robe, puts on her shoes, goes down to close the gate and runs into him, and he flips out? Maybe. I just think in such an isolated area, the first people that the guard should have looked into was the neighbors. But from the best I can tell, Alfie Lyons was never considered a suspect, which is interesting given his proximity to the crime scene.
Well, and also we know that when, a crime happens, usually one of the questions that a loved one is asked of the victim is, was there anyone who the victim was fighting with? Was there anyone who you know what I mean? Again, like, yeah. Does it feel like, arguing about property lines and gates is enough of a motive for murder? Of course not. Is it a motive for an angry fight to escalate into an accidental assault / killing in a moment of blackout rage? Yes.
Yeah.
Again, in a world of anything being possible. So yeah, I agree with you that it's like in a place that's that rural. Yeah, it does feel like, again, because to me, again, the thing I've written down so many times is like, okay, but what is Ian Bailey's motive here? Like, what is the motive? Just that he's crazy? Is that why he's like pulling his teeth out on camera to try and like perpetuate that narrative? I don't know. But again, like, and I'm not using the word crazy. I don't usually use the word crazy. I don't love that word because I think it's misused. But you know what I mean? Like, I feel like he's somebody who's like perpetuating that act of what you would call that,
Yes, 100%. Well, another thing worth noting, the beginning of the investigation, Alfie Lyons was the only person who claimed that Ian Bailey had previously met Sophie.
Interesting.
Others have come forward since, but it took 14 years after the murder before someone corroborated Alfie's story.
Huh.
And something else I couldn't confirm was a Garda on scene allegedly claimed to have seen a bandage on Alfie Lyons' hand. He claimed it was from a wound from a dog bite as they were watching a friend's dog. But again, I could not back that up, so I'm not 100%.
It's a shame he didn't pull out his sketchbook in the moment.
Oh, right. It's just the sketch is so much more juvenile than you're thinking it is.
I can't wait. I cannot wait.
It's too much. So some have suggested that maybe the killer was a hitman hired to get rid of Sophie. Ian Bailey believes that Sophie's husband, Daniel, hired a hitman. And while we, of course, have no idea what Daniel and Sophie's relationship was like behind closed doors, I just don't think that he has a motive that big to like Like that crime was so brutal. And what does he gain from her death? If it was a case of wanting to be with another woman, I don't think Sophie would have stood in his way. And what about Bruno hiring a hitman? While he was upset about their breakup, it happened 3 years before. Is he still angry? I don't know. I just can't imagine that Sophie's killer was someone from Sophie's life. I just don't see a motive, especially not a crime so violent. Possibly, unless you're a neighbor, I haven't decided yet. I know a lot of people see a violent crime and they think of it as incredibly personal. I just see an intense level of anger. And if someone did have the motive to hire a hitman, someone going out to such an isolated location that is difficult to get to at the best of times seems unlikely, especially in the dark. Not to mention, the concrete block and the slate that were used as murder weapons seem more of a crime of opportunity as opposed to a professional hit. And I know that it's not out of the realm of possibility, but a professional hitman not taking any weapons and using a method that is so brutal that it's possible he left his DNA at the scene seems unlikely to me. But again, that's just my opinion. Of those 209 deaths that I keep mentioning, 13% were killed by a stranger. So what if Sophie's killer was a stranger? Figuring out motive with a stranger isn't always easy, and I don't buy the idea that someone just happened to be walking by and it was a crime of opportunity. Sophie's house was in an isolated area that wasn't easy to get to, even with proper directions. So to just stumble upon it feels unlikely. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't a stranger who committed the crime. In fact, I'm almost convinced of it. Is it possible that a man hit on Sophie when she was at O'Sullivan's earlier in the evening, and she turned him down, so he followed her home and then somehow lured her outside? It seems plausible to me, but of course, I don't exactly have a list of people who were at O'Sullivan's that night, or even a list of people who lived in the area at the time. So suggesting a stranger doesn't give me any leads to go on. But that Women's Aid report that I read that mentioned the 209 women, I printed the list of victims' names off and went through all of their cases to find out all of their causes of death to see if I found any that were similar. Did it physically hurt my soul to read the cause of death of more than 200 women? Yeah, it's been a hard week. But that's what I do for the people.
Yes.
Now, once I got cause of death, I turned my focus away from the women who were stabbed or strangled or shot. I felt the perp, if I may use the term perp, committed multiple crimes. They're going to have a similar MO. And yes, I know some killers like Richard Ramirez don't stick to one specific MO, so it's likely whoever killed Sophie could have killed another woman with a gun, for example, but I didn't have time to go through over 200 cases, and I went with my instinct and focused on blunt force trauma, because there is something so personal to a level of anger like that I just have to believe that if this monster killed again, he'd use a similar method. So I started looking at other women who were killed after Sophie. And I'm not saying they're exactly the same, but just run with me on this.
Yes.
So Maura Shaw was 39 years old when she was found at the bottom of the stairs of her own home in September 1997. The autopsy showed she died from a fractured skull. Did it happen from the fall? I don't know. The fact that her skull was fractured, that's my brain focused in on it. Then we have Eileen Costello O'Shaughnessy. She failed to return home from her taxi driving job on November 30th, 1997. She started work around 8 a.m. that morning and was fairly busy throughout the day. At 8 p.m., Eileen told the taxi depot she was taking a fare to Clare, Galway. 20 minutes later, when the depot attempted to contact her, Eileen didn't respond. She was meant to meet the taxi's owner at 9 p.m. to hand over the car and the keys, but she didn't arrive, so they tried contacting her again. Just before midnight, the taxi was discovered at a bakery. There were visible signs that a violent incident had occurred within the taxi. Eileen's body was found the next day in a country laneway, just 9 miles or 14 kilometers from Galway City, where her taxi depot was located. Eileen was just 47 years old. According to the autopsy, performed, of course, by Dr. John Harbison, Eileen died from injuries to her brain sustained as a result of her having her skull fractured. It was said that extreme force and violence was inflicted during the attack, but that Eileen had not been sexually assaulted. Eileen's brother-in-law was wrongfully charged with the crime and later released. Her murder is currently unsolved.
Stop.
Then there's the tragic death of Meg Walsh. She disappeared October 1st, 2006. Her body was found in the River Sur on October 15th. She was just 35 years old. The autopsy stated that she died from multiple blows to the head with a heavy object, which broke her skull into pieces. Some of the pieces were found in her brain. Meg's case is also currently unsolved. And I know there are a lot of monsters in the world, so these crimes probably were committed by different suspects. But all of the women were similar ages. The level of violence was very similar. It just makes me question, is it possible whoever killed Sophie killed again? I just don't believe that intense level of anger wouldn't come out again at some point. And yes, it's possible the killer changed his MO or went for a weapon that was on hand. But honestly, I had to stop looking into the brutal deaths of women. We usually just focus on one, and that's heavy enough. I was swimming through over 200 deaths, and honestly, I had to stop because I felt like I was drowning. I think one of the things that frustrates me the most about all of this is the fact that nothing is straightforward. Witnesses have admitted to lying. Police has managed to narrow down the suspect pool from 50 to 1 in the course of a couple of weeks. And of course, you know, I hate shoddy investigative work. And in this case, it involves missing evidence.
Doesn't it always? I feel like this is something we hear on this show over and over and over again.
100%. Somehow, there is a ton of evidence from this case that has just mysteriously vanished. And for the sake of time, both now during the show and then while I was writing my notes, I'm just going to give you a point form section that I'm simply calling evidence that has gone missing. A 2004 witness statement from Marie Farrell. The original witness statement from Jules Thomas following her first arrest. Reading this one, I realized I hadn't mentioned it before. Allegedly, a sealed bottle of French wine was found in the field near the spot where Sophie's body was found about 4 months after the murder. Apparently, it was an expensive bottle, like we're talking 60 to 70 British pounds, which is like 81 to 95 US dollars. And remember, that's 96 pricing, so that would be equivalent to 140 to 170 US dollars today. Also, that kind of wine was not stocked in any shop in Skull, but it could be purchased at the airport duty-free shop. Oh, well, that bottle has gone missing. Then there was the issue with Ian Bailey's black coat. Since Marie Farrell initially claimed she saw Ian wearing a long black coat that night on the bridge, the Garda were consumed with finding Bailey's long black coat. And they publicly claimed they believed that Bailey had burned the coat the day after Christmas to hide the evidence. Well, it turns out that's not true. According to the evidence log, the guard collected a long black coat at Ian Bailey's residence and tested it. And somehow, the coat has since gone missing. And the Sophie, a Murder in West Cork doc does not tell you that. It tells you Ian Bailey had this coat and burnt it.
Oh, really?
It really focused on that one. That doc really pushes Ian Bailey did this, Ian Bailey. And the other one I watched was like we have Ian Bailey in this telling you how it was not Ian Bailey.
Right.
And so that one was longer, not just because it was more episodes, but because you had to listen to Ian talk more. But still. Oh, and you know what else disappeared? The 14-foot metal gate that they seized from the crime scene. How do you misplace a 14-foot metal gate? There were also pages missing from various Garda reports, including pages missing from the job books, which are a complete record of all the activity that is undertaken in a major or critical incident, along with the rationale behind the various decisions that are made. Apparently, pages were missing from job books regarding Sophie's murder scene, most from a section in the book where Ian Bailey was first named as a suspect. And one more thing I wanted to mention, because I realize now I forgot to mention it earlier in my notes and I'm too tired to scroll through to find where this should go. Allegedly, while the Garda were canvassing door to door to see if anyone had heard or seen anything after Sophie's murder, they found a man who is living in Goleen, which is about 4 miles or 7 kilometers away from Tumor, where Sophie lived. The man said that around 7:30 a.m. on December 23rd, he was driving from Goleen to Cork when a car came up behind him and overtook him on a hairpin bend. The man had to swerve to get out of the way. The man said that it was a blue Ford Fiesta with red number license plates. The police spoke with this witness on December 24th, the next day, and yet the police never went looking for a blue Ford Fiesta. In fact, this witness wasn't even in the official Garda file. It was found in the boxes of documents that Ian Bailey was given access to 17 years after the crime. Was the killer speeding away from the scene? At this point, honestly, we will probably never know. So hopefully that last bit of information shows just how frustrating this case has been to sift through. And I apologize if it's been difficult to follow along. Mentally, I'm on another planet. To quote Matchbox 20, I'm not crazy. I'm just a little unwell.
Wow. First of all, thank you. A shout out. Rob Thomas said Matchbox 20. Unless they're problematic. Have they gotten problematic? I don't know.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. Not that I've heard. Yeah. Wow. Listen, there's so much to digest here. Yes. I'm frothing at the mouth, ready to dive in. So let's take another quick break. Again, go take another tinkle. Get yourself another can of something that says hello to you. And we'll be right back with more about the case of Sophie, a murder in West Cork on this episode of True Crime and Cocktails. All right. On 3. 1, 2, 3. Welcome back to this episode of True Crime and Cocktails. Of course, we are talking Sophie, a murder in West Cork. Before the break, we were talking about missing evidence, which again is just something that comes up so often in true crime. And then Christy quoted Matchbox 20, which was a real joy for me. And if this is one of your first times listening to the program, we do talk pop culture on here too. But again, go back and listen to the Glee curse. It's a romp. I'm kidding. Listen, now that we're back here, I'm sure you've got a little bit more for us before we get to our thoughts and theories. So lay it on us.
Well, before I sign off, because I have not signed off yet.
Hasn't done it.
You know that I like to be as up to date as possible on the people that I've just spent, I don't know, the last day talking about. We've been here forever.
Many days.
So may I present, where are they now?
Where are they now?
Always dropping the hot beats.
Sounded nice.
Yeah. Well, it works perfect with the new headphones, right? Just suits them, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So Sophie's husband, Daniel Toscan du Plantier, didn't return to Ireland for nearly 4 years after Sophie's death. But before that, in 1998, 57-year-old Daniel married his 30-year-old girlfriend, Melita Nikolic. And I know what you're thinking. He married a woman nearly half his age, less than 2 years after his wife was found brutally murdered. Yes, but remember, Sophie and Daniel's marriage was not the norm. It was said that Daniel was dating Melita at the time of Sophie's death and that he moved in with her the moment she died. Like as soon as he heard, he packed his stuff and was like, I'm out. Daniel said, quote, "You have to respond to death with life. It doesn't mean you don't love the marks left within you by the woman who has been taken from you. It doesn't lessen the misfortune, the memory, and the suffering remain." As a child, Melita's parents fled Yugoslavia to France, and then at some point, Melita's mother was murdered. Unfortunately, I could not find more information about that, but after her mother's death, Melita grew up in social services type situation, like an orphanage or foster home. She did some modeling in her teens, and at age 18, moved to the United States to be an au pair. Melita returned to France and was hired as a hostess at the Cannes Film Festival, which led to her being hired as a press officer for Unifrance in 1995. The president of Unifrance, however we're going to say it, at the time was Daniel, and the two hit it off. Some say they didn't start a relationship until after Sophie's death because the tragedy helped them bond due to Melita's own experience with tragedy. But Daniel said he moved in right away. So unless they moved in at the beginning of their relationship, I'm skeptical that it started after 1996. Melita gave birth to the couple's daughter, Tosca, on March 19th, 1998. And then on June 26th of that same year, Melita and Daniel were married. And the part that I find odd, the person who Daniel chose as his witness at the wedding, Isabel Huppert, the woman he had a decade-long affair with in the 80s. So I guess they ended on good terms. Daniel claims they planned to marry earlier, but postponed it so as to not shock the public with it being so close to Sophie's death. The thing about the wedding that I don't like is that it happened on the same weekend that Sophie's family gathered in West Cork to place a Celtic cross in Sophie's honor. The family said they invited him, but he never mentioned the wedding to them at the time. Did he choose that weekend to get married so he'd have an excuse not to attend the memorial and therefore not be forced to confront his legitimate feelings? Maybe. I would like it noted that the cross was placed for Sophie. It was blessed by the same priest who arrived on the scene in 1996 and said the last rites. I don't know why. Somehow I found that comforting. Even though it's a small area, I should not be surprised by it, but for some reason I was. Daniel and Melita also would go on to have a son, Maxime, in 2000. While attending a Berlin film festival, Daniel suffered a heart attack and died February 11th, 2003. Sophie's family still strongly believe that Ian Bailey murdered Sophie. Her parents, George and Marguerite, are now 95 and 93 respectively. And while Marguerite suffers from Parkinson's, the couple continues to attend any trials involved in the case. No one slept in Sophie's holiday home for a year after her murder. Her father, George, made a trip on his own to show that they didn't fear the person who killed his daughter. George said, quote, "I had the impression we'd left her house to him, and I didn't want that. The house now belongs to Sophie's son, Pierre Louis, who has said the house helps him feel connected to his mother. A coat that she hung up on the back door in 1996 still hangs where she left it. Pierre Louis often visits the house alone, but also takes his family there, which includes his wife Aurelia, their 8-year-old son Louis, and their 9-year-old daughter Sophie."
Oh.
And that's what almost broke me this week.
Yeah.
That right there. Alfie Lyons died in early 2021. So Shirley put the house on the market in July. I don't know who, if anyone, has purchased that house, but my hope is the buyers are just some nice people and not some looky-loos who are going to bother Sophie's son while he's in town. And apparently I say looky-loos now. So just know that. In April 2021, Bailey and his partner, Jules Thomas, ended their relationship after 30 years. While she has always supported his innocence, she said her children had started to refuse to visit because of Bailey. So for the sake of seeing her grandchildren, Jules finally said she'd had enough. Bailey, of course, denies that Jules' children had any sort of issue. A quote from Jules about their relationship, quote, "I put up with him for far too long, and I realize now that it was a waste of my time. It was always a one-way flow. Men like him don't ever bend or accommodate. It's to do with their egos." Speaking of egos, in 2010, Ian Bailey earned a law degree from Cork University. His final thesis was called "Policing the Police, Guards Accountability in Ireland." He had it printed and bound in a hardcover book and said, quote, "I received 72%, which is almost unheard of." I then immediately tried to Google what's the average mark on that to be like, is it almost unheard of? I couldn't get an answer, but the point is he's always talking out his ass. Currently, Bailey is often seen at markets selling copies of his books of poetry, which he claims are, quote, "flying off the shelves," and selling various homegrown foods like Old Bailey's seasonal pickles. On August 25th, 2019, Bailey got stopped at a Garda checkpoint. Not only was Bailey allegedly not wearing his seatbelt, but he also smelled of alcohol. The vehicle was searched and a small tin of cannabis was found. Bailey claimed, someone had just left that in the market stall. When the car was searched, 3 joints were found. Bailey was convicted of drug driving and possession of cannabis for his own use in May 2021 and is banned from driving for 12 months, as well as fined €700, which is about $811. As of October 31st, 2021, a special squad has been reinvestigating Sophie's murder. The squad includes 5 officers and a superintendent who had been looking into the statements that had been made since the airing of the Netflix and Sky documentaries from earlier this year. One of the people interviewed was a former neighbor who claimed that there was a prowler in the area at the time of Sophie's murder. I don't know what new information they may or may not find, but I'm relieved to know that at least they are actively working on it. In the end, it's a tragedy that her life was ended as short and in such a brutal way. I'm sad for her family, especially for her son for having to endure this. And I'm sad that the world lost a talented female television producer, especially one that was described as joyful, sunny, and full of life. During her lifetime, Sophie shied away from the spotlight, but since her death, she has become the focus of numerous podcasts, as well as 2 documentaries that came out in 2021. One was released by Netflix, the other released by Sky. One focused heavily on Ian Bailey as guilty, the other focused on Ian Bailey as innocent. And while we get into our thoughts in a second, I'm just disappointed that once again we found ourselves in a case that involves questionable police work. I think we all agree Sophie deserved better than that. Reporting for True Crime and Cocktails, I've barely made it. That's where we're
You
at.
did great.
Oh.
The first thing I have to say out of the gate, early on, I wrote down serial killer. Early on. My serial killer spidey sense was a tingling. And so then when you started to piece together, and I just want to say I was proud to watch you start to profile. It was beautiful to watch. You did exactly what I would have done. She learned it from watching me. I'm kidding, but jokes aside, I would have done the same thing. And what I kept writing down before you got to that was there a spike in the deaths of women in 1996, specifically in the area? And I know that you would not necessarily have access to this information, but if we had, time and resources, etc., and we're doing this one case as a full-time job, I would go the other way too. I would go back.
I tried. I could
Prior.
only
Yeah.
find to like, I found some in 95, but then thank God for this report, it mentioned names, whereas the other
Right.
way it didn't. But it seems like cases went, it seemed 96. I think that's why they started the report there, is when things started getting bad.
Yeah. Which is interesting because again, that feels to me like, again, that's, I mean, I wrote it in my notes more than once. I was just like, this feels like a serial killer because again, I mean, look, I'm going to get into all of it, but the motive is the hard thing here. Motive is the big question mark because again,
Yep.
we're rural. To your point, there's not a lot of people that have access. There's not a lot of people that have a want to hurt her that we know of. All of this against Ian Bailey is mostly being based on circumstantial evidence. Like you said, there's no DNA, there's no blood matches. So it just felt to me like as soon as you started, again, I had serial killer on my mind from the beginning, but as soon as you said, that there was potentially an influx of women being murdered around that time, I was like, I wonder if that's what it is. So again, my heart was singing my heart wasn't singing women are dying. It's terrible, but I loved the way that your brain was working. Cause I was going the exact same place where I was going to, you look for the MO, finding ones that were similar. Again, I bet you if we had more time and access to police computers in Ireland, and we went the other way, I'm curious if there would be a few. And then when does it drop off? Who knows? But also, the MO could have changed after that. So it could have started as being blunt force and it could have changed to something else, et cetera. But especially considering the ones that you brought up and that woman in the taxi who also was not sexually assaulted, blunt force trauma, et cetera. And there's nothing to say that, it could have also been, who knows? It could have also been somebody that we already know. It could have been one of these characters also, who knows? But it just seems very, I don't know. And the other thing I would add too, you mentioned early on that there was a peeping Tom that had been in the neighborhood. And then you mentioned at the end that somebody was talking about a prowler.
Yeah.
Peeping Toms turn into prowlers. And for those who maybe aren't familiar with those terms, peeping Tom, obviously you're looking in the windows and stuff, and prowler can mean that same thing, but I also think it can mean like light break-ins, right? Like,
sure.
And those things can escalate to assaults and that can escalate to murders. I mean, that's an MO that can grow that way. There's multiple cases of serial killers that start again, small peeping Toms, those kinds of things, and eventually do work up. So again, that's where my gut would go right away.
I should also say,
personally,
when I was thinking serial killer, when I started looking through similar cases, I was so convinced that the taxi one a year later was the same person that I looked after that and started looking just similar MO, even if it was solved. And then I started looking into that guy to see if that guy could potentially have been the one, because it's possible there aren't other ones unsolved from him because he was caught at a different point or he went to jail for something else and had to stop for a bit. So I poured through that report more than I should have, but it felt nice to have the paper in my hands. I highlighted, I made notes. I came alive, but it also killed me.
I get that. And again, it's like, it would require being, first, police detectives, second, having access to all of the files and paperwork and resources. But third, it then becomes a full-time job. So it's amazing that you made the connections that you did in the amount of time that you did, because that's what takes police work, detective work. Good detectives can take, months and years. So very proud. Very proud.
I also feel like if anyone's going to give us access to a computer, why not the police who I'm referring to in the proper term as the Garda?
I thought it was really nice. I thought that it made sense and that you were honoring the area. So if they'd like to let us have access to those computers, just know we're interested.
Yeah.
It is wild. Again, the thing you pointed out, the synchronicity of Michael Collins, that's really weird. And, again, it really does it's a good reminder to remember that there had not been like, just to give a context again, that there had not been a murder in this area in so long that, yeah, does that excuse to me potentially doing a drawing of a hand instead of a camera, a photograph? Maybe. Does it excuse for me losing a 14-foot metal gate? No, it doesn't. Something else is going on here. Regardless if this is a serial killer, regardless of who did it, something else is up. Whether it's just that they wanted to, and we know that there has been a history. There are lots of other cases that we could bring out where you want to find someone to pin it on. They pin a crime on someone and they do whatever they have to do to make that stick, whether that is things go missing. That is not something that is uncommon. So it could be that. Who knows? But the biggest thing to me again was that this is two different things. This isn't just like not having a lot of experience with these kinds of crimes, because you don't lose that kind of evidence just because you're inexperienced. That doesn't track for me. I'm curious about why they made the choice to leave her outside under sheets. Now, granted, I know it's December. I'm sure the thought went through their minds that it was cold, so maybe it's okay that she's left outside. And I understand they didn't want to move the body. I get that. But it's just interesting to me because I would have thought the middle ground would still have been moving her to a morgue. But again, I don't know. And then, of course, I just wrote down shortage of pathologists. Again, just let us know when your graduation is. We will be there on our own dime. Another thing I found interesting is, of course, what she was wearing at the time, being in a robe, pants, and boots. When you said later that it was like, did she throw on the robe to like step out of the house to do something? That feels likely to me. It's like, why would you have hiking boots on with a robe and pants, right?
Yeah.
It's odd to me. First time I wrote down, what is motive? Again, just like I wrote that down so many times. It's like, what is this motive? The Doc Martin-ish boot print on the neck, I just wrote down neo-Nazi. I don't know. I'm throwing anything out there. Honestly, it was like, I don't know. I wear Doc Martens. I'm certainly not a neo-Nazi, so we can't begin to make that connection. But you know what I'm saying? It was like, we're trying to think of anything here. It's interesting again. It's interesting. I mean, it's amazing that she fought so hard that she broke her hands. Jesus. Yeah. Oh, that is heartbreaking. The stories that kept changing from Marie, there's something there too, because her original story about about the man being slight changed when the police were basically like, was it this man, Ian Bailey? And she was like, yes. And then he was a different build and height and all of the above. But then later when she said, no, I'm recanting, she did go back to her original. He was a slight man, again, long face, etc. So I don't know. I mean, that's wild too. How much was she bullied? How much of that was true or wasn't? Because if it is true that she did see this man in a long black coat and flat black hat following her, and then she happened, again, through some synchronicity, to see that man again, what's her story? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not saying that Marie did it. I'm just saying that, what's her alibi?
Yeah.
But it's just odd to me. It was like, again, like, what would the chances be that you would have this woman come into your shop and see that man, and then you would happen upon seeing that man again on a random bridge on a random night when it's very dark? I don't know. I thought that what you were eventually going to tell me was that it came out that she had made all of it up. That was just where it seemed like it was going, because it seemed so implausible to me. And the fact that it was that testimony, that was what they built that whole case around against Ian Bailey. I mean, I don't need to tell you.
Yeah.
Wild. My heart breaks for Jules Thomas. I mean, again, domestic violence is a real thing, obviously, and it feels like by the end, she had that come to, for lack of a better term, come to Jesus moment after 30 years, saying she felt like she wasted her life with this person who treated her the way he did. And that's, again, Not, I'm saying that with no judgment. I'm saying my heart breaks for her because she is obviously a survivor. But like you said, she did not deserve any of that harassment because she was already living in a state that, again, is far easier to find yourself in than people who have not experienced that would realize. So again, my heart breaks for her too. Again, so much of this is circumstantial. Did the bonfire happen? Did it not? Was it, you know what I mean? Like, again, like, okay, so they're finding burnt things. Is it what it is? It not? Again, it's fascinating to me. Now, when they said he was releasing all of these articles with information that he didn't know about yet. My question is this, because we know that he was on the scene early and they told him to leave, but he hung around and hung around and hung around. Is it possible that he hung around and overheard stuff? These are cops that are not used to dealing with a murder.
That's true.
I could absolutely see them running their mouths or out of sheer panic. We also need to remember, to your descriptions, this body has a badly bashed in skull. So I'm certain that police who have never had to deal with this in 70 years in that area, they may be a little bit off their game as well. I don't believe that him knowing that information that had not been made public, to be honest with you, that to me, I was like, he could have pieced together, again, if he's a good, sneaky journalist, if he's, lurking around and again, you said that he was there, they asked him to leave. He actually kind of hung out longer. I think he could have overheard a lot more than people think, than even the police would think. And certainly the police would never admit that they had said things and allowed a reporter to overhear them. So to me, again, I was like, I don't think that means anything really. Even if he knew the victim was French, again, he could have known that from being there for 30 seconds.
Right.
Like, I don't know. So the one thing I did think that was interesting, though, now I'm going back, maybe it is Ian Bailey, is that we know that Sophie was found with hair in her hands and it was hers.
Yeah.
And then when you were talking about one of the assaults on Jules, there was hair found in her hands along with her facial injuries. And that just stuck out to me, that I was like, that's interesting that there was kind of a similarity there. Again, could be something, might not. The fact that he assaulted her with a crutch, again, using an object, blunt force trauma, could be something, could be not. An intolerance to frustration, again, could be something, could be not. What I will never stop butting up against is simply, what was his motive with Sophie? Even if they had met, even if it is what you're saying, they met at a bar, he hit on her, she said no, he followed her home and did it. Is that possible? Absolutely. But again, no one saw him at that bar. No one saw, you know what I mean? Like, if it's just odd to me, if like, when would they have met and when would they have had an altercation that would have led to that level of anger? Because we know that he got real angry at Jules not defending him at all. And he got close to killing her. And he assaulted her horrifically, but he never went through with it with her. So what would it have taken for him to take out that level of anger then on a stranger? It feels like there would have had to have been an altercation, to me.
Right.
Of some kind.
Yeah. I've never understood why, like, I get it. There's something about him. I get that. And he's a large man, so you immediately see that as powerful. So I get it. But at the same time, it's, even if he had met her, what is going to make him that angry? And it's just,
it's again, like, that's the piece of this that just will never make sense to me with him, is that the motive, like, what's the motive and why was there no one that saw them meet and have some sort of altercation ahead of time?
Yeah.
The one thing that stuck out to me was also, how did no one hear this? I know it's the middle of the night, but it's the middle of the night. This is also the middle of nowhere in the country. You can hear a pin drop. And you mean to tell me that a woman gets brutally murdered outside and no one hears it? No one hears anything?
Yeah. I'm not sure. I could not find out if the Richardsons were at the house at the time. So that house might have been empty, but Alfie Lyons was home.
It's interesting to me that his wife found the body. It's interesting to me that they didn't hear anything in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me also that the one thing I found interesting was they made this kind of like claim that it was like she was running out of the house away from this person. Now, again, I haven't seen the files. We haven't seen the blood spatter, I'm sure. So we don't know. Maybe there is something to corroborate that. My point was, how do we know she wasn't, to your point, running towards the gate? How do we know? To me, it makes more sense that this would have happened as she was going towards someone she knew. Because to your point, if she was running away from an intruder, either she would have run to the Lyons house because she maybe knew the other neighbors weren't there, would have been screaming bloody murder, somebody to help me, right?
Yeah.
To me, it just, and that's not just, and even if it wasn't Alfie Lyons in that situation, it still seems to me like, was she coming out of the house to go down to the gate to confront whoever was there that she knew or didn't know, but it just felt to me like she was drawn there as opposed to was running there. But maybe there was some sort of forensic that proved otherwise. But again, probably lost.
Yeah.
Pulled out own tooth.
I like
the only other thing that stuck out to me was you mentioned that someone described the crime as over the top, and then you also mentioned that Jules described Ian Bailey as over the top. So that was interesting again for a synchronicity, but again, doesn't mean anything. I do think that there's a possibility is there a possibility of it being a hitman? I mean, maybe, but to me, if Daniel hired a hitman, why wouldn't he then show up at the hospital to identify the body, to like hide in plain sight? You know?
Yeah.
That seems odd to me. Now, the one thing I will say is in terms of Melita, his new wife, what's her alibi?
Interesting.
They moved in as soon as they found out and had a child, very shortly after. They pushed the wedding to a whopping 2 years after a brutal murder of his ex-wife because they didn't want to alarm the public.
Yeah.
She lost a mother in a very brutal way. I'm not suggesting that the children of people who are murdered are going to go on to murder, but I'm merely saying, show me the alibi. Was she ever asked? Because my guess is she wasn't. And isn't that also like an interesting, was there some sort of tension between the two of them? Did they have an open relationship, but did Melita not care for this? Did she show up in the middle of the night and Sophie like, what are you doing here? Simply saying.
It's possible.
Speculating, alleging. Yeah. And then my last thought was it's so interesting to me that again, there's always someone I feel like who gets tied up in these things. Ian Bailey being this example where if he didn't do it, and let's say for a second he didn't, it's so frustrating that he, through his own, narcissism, whatever his diagnosis may or may not be, personality disorder, etc. It's just so frustrating because it obstructs justice at the end of the day. And it's again, if he did do it, it's frustrating because there wasn't enough to get justice. But if he didn't do it, that's worse to me because he's, through again his own performance and etc., he has halted actual justice being served. So those are my thoughts. My big thoughts are serial killer and Alfie Lyons and Melita.
Oh, I like that. I mean, you know what I mean. I can't. It's just, I would like to think if you hear a woman screaming that you would hear it, Like, I would like to think in that area, you'd be able to hear it. Maybe I'm wrong. But again, if it's someone she knew that she didn't feel threatened by until they hit her the first time, then she wouldn't have made much of a sound. But again, I don't feel like anyone's just going to randomly show up in that area. So, as much as I want to say Ian Bailey, I really don't see why it would be Ian Bailey. But I can't decide if it's a serial killer, because I mean, I tried to look in like the specific areas of the counties throughout Ireland to make sure to like follow the path. Would it make sense of them going to different areas? So it's either serial killer or Alfie Lyons for me. And the fact that the police were just like, oh, it couldn't have been him. It's like, what made you say that?
Well, yeah. How is he connected to the police? What's the relationship there? The only other batshit motive I can come up with for Ian Bailey is that he was so desperate to become a famous journalist that he committed a murder so that he could cover it and become this like rock star journalist to become famous that way.
Can I tell you something?
Yeah.
One of the things when in his confession, he confessed to like 7 or 8 different people. A fellow journalist quoted him as saying, yeah, I killed her to further my own career.
Really?
And it was like I killed her so I'd have a story to go on. And he's like, obviously I was, it's my dark sense of humor. Nobody gets it. It's like, because it's not funny.
Because it's not funny.
It's not funny when we're talking about a woman who was murdered that hasn't been solved. Like,
yeah,
I get dark comedy, but this was not the time.
Not the time. And also, again, I don't know. I think he would be too sloppy. I don't know. I just don't know that I feel like he's a mastermind, but maybe I'm wrong. Well, listen, Christy Oxborrow, fabulous work. Really impressive stuff. I hope that this is someone's first episode of the show because they're going to get to see you shine, even though I'm having a mental breakdown. It's a beautiful thing to witness.
I quoted Matchbox 20.
And listen, you did it well. This episode, again, so fascinating. I understand why the dear listeners wanted us to cover this one because it is infuriating and fascinating. Yeah. And I hope that this new task force, this new special squad gets some answers and hopefully justice can be found because I mean, we wish that for every victim of one of these crimes. And Sophie is no different. She deserves it all the same. Thank you for listening to this episode of True Crime and Cocktails. If you haven't, please give us a follow on socials, on Instagram at True Crime and Cocktails, Facebook and YouTube at the same, Twitter at Not Detectives, patreon.com/True Crime and Cocktails if you like a little bit more. The only place to get official True Crime and Cocktails merch is truecrewmerch.com. And you know what? Head over. If you like the show, give us a nice review somewhere. Help us drown out the voices of the yahoos who are being so mean these last few weeks, which I don't know why. I don't know why we're having that influx. But it's always nice to read the nice things, and it's always helpful to drown out the negative Nellies. Christy, do you want to tell the people about the next episode of the show?
Yeah. It turns out we're doing back-to-back Netflix.
I love it.
And didn't even need to.
Yeah.
On the next True Crime and Cocktails, Evil Genius.
Oh, it's a documentary series on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, let me tell you, it's going to be a good episode because it is a wild tale, and I cannot wait to hear what you have dug up. Christy, do you want to say goodnight to the people?
Good night, Dave Girl.
Good night, future time traveling us.